a gavel, but all right. So let's go ahead and get started. It's 10 o'clock. And are we all, is it Madam Moderator, or are we on? Okay.
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. All right. So good morning, everybody. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a few announcements. So first of all, if I could ask everybody here to turn our cell phones to silent. And then during our meeting today, you will notice that board members accessing their laptops, phones, or other devices, they are using these devices solely to access the board meeting materials that are in electronic format. We have also designated time on the agenda for public comment and ask for public comment on each agenda item. I ask that you be respectful of the need to conduct the board's business. This meeting is also available via teleconference. Individuals listening to the meeting will have an opportunity to provide public comment and will be assisted by a moderator who will be facilitating the teleconferencing process. For those members of the public participating in the via teleconference, please wait until the moderator has introduced you before you make your comments. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes per agenda item. However, during agenda item number 2, public comments on items not on the agenda, the board will welcome public comments for 5 minutes per speaker. The board welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comment prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason I forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item and you wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand and you will be recognized. Today's meeting will be run according to the Open Meeting Act as required by law. We plan to end by 4 p.m. today. First of all, I'd like to introduce our Executive Officer, Gregory Pruden.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, that's it. You don't want to say anything else? Okay. I thought you would have more to say. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started? I'd like to ask Secretary Linden to please take a roll call.
Okay, Dr. Bragg. Member Kleppa.
Here.
Member Linden is here. Dr. Pruitt. Member Sims. Absent. Member Sue.
Here.
Dr. Garcia.
Present.
And Dr. Wong.
Present.
Okay, so we have a quorum with 6 members.
Perfect. We have quorum. Let's go ahead and move on to item number 2, public comments on items not on the agenda. And it looks like we have someone from the audience that wants to come and say, yes, please.
Board members, Executive Officer Gregory, we're very delighted and happy with what board staff has done with opticians. I am Ruby Garcia, the Executive Officer of the California State Society for Opticians. We provide educational resources for optometric assistants, technicians, SLDs, and CLDs. And we want to thank you publicly because we think staff has done a great job at getting our licenses. So thank you for that. And we continue to work together with you on that. What we also support are about 9 colleges for opticians that have opened up, and we're going to open up more. So we'll keep giving you that exciting news, and we'd like to work with you on that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Are there any other members of the public who would like to make a comment? Madam Moderator, if you could open up the telephones.
Certainly. We're displaying instructions on the screen, but if anyone would like to make a comment on an item that is not on the agenda, you may either raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, or you may look for the question mark icon, type the word comment in that text box, and click send. We do have a request for comment from Paul Reimers. Someone logged into WebEx as Paul Reimers. Paul, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 5 minutes. You're unmuted. Paul, we're not hearing your voice yet.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I've just brought this up a couple times before, but I wonder if anything has been done about it yet. I was wondering about, see, I'm in a retired volunteer status, and so I basically just do diabetic vision screening for a free clinic 2-3 times a month. And I was wondering if it'd be possible to reduce the requirements of CE for guys like us, because we're so limited in what service we provide. Say maybe from 50 down to 30 to 35 units over the period of license. It's just a question I have, and that I wonder if that's possible to consider that. So that's my question.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Reimer, for your comment. We'll be talking about continuing education later today. Yeah, later in the meeting today, but thank you for your comment.
And this is the moderator, and it does not look like we have any further requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Then we're going to move on to item number 3, which is discussion and possible approval of minutes from the May 12th, 2023 board meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the May 2023 minutes from our members? Doesn't look like anyone has raised their hand. May I have a motion to approve these minutes as submitted? Oh, did you have a? Okay, we're good. All right, can I have a motion to approve these minutes?
I'll move to accept the minutes as written.
All right, Dr. Garcia has made the motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second the motion.
Member Pleppa has seconded. Are there any public comments from the audience? Does not look like we have any public comments. Are there any comments from those on the phone?
This is the moderator, and we are displaying instructions, but if anyone has any comments on meeting minutes or the motion, you may look for the hand icon and click that to raise your hand. You may look for the question mark icon, click that, type the word comment and click send. And if you are a call-in user, you may press *3 to raise your hand. Each speaker will have 2 minutes with a 30-second warning. Are there any comments on the minutes or the motion? I do not see any requests for comments. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Secretary Linden, if you could please perform a roll call vote.
Okay. Dr. Bragg,
Aye.
Member Kleppa,
Aye.
Member Linden, aye. Member Sue,
Aye.
Dr. Garcia,
Aye.
and Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Okay, the measure passes with a 6-0 vote.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to go on and move on to item number 4, which is the board president's report. First of all, so that's my report. So first of all, we have 3 new members that have joined our board. So I would like to introduce all of them and welcome them. Our first is Stacy Bragg. Second is Robert Kleppa. And our third new member is Paul Sue. Included in the materials for our new members are biographies. Dr. Bragg is a practicing optometrist here in Sacramento for Regency Eye Care and a telehealth optometrist at Empire Vision Center. Member Kleppa is an attorney and a hearing officer for several government agencies in Southern California and an adjunct instructor with the Santa Monica College and the University of California, Los Angeles Extension Program. And Member Sue is a businessman with interest in construction and auto entities and a national governing board member of the Asia Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Organization, also known as APAPA. On behalf of the board, I would like to welcome all 3 of our new members. And at this time, if any of you would like to say anything, you can go ahead and.
I just wanted to say thank you for the kind introduction, and I'm sure I, along with all my members, all my fellow members, would do my best to help sustain the board's mission. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, President, for the kind introduction. And as a new member, I'll probably need some time to, try to follow the process of the board. Thank you.
Thank you for the welcome. I'm excited to be on the board and I look forward to serving the citizens of California. Thank you.
Well, welcome all three of you. We're very excited to have you join our board. All right, so we're at the next part. Now that you guys are official members of our boards, I would like to talk about committees. So it's not just our board meetings, but we also do have committee meetings that I'm hoping our new board members will be interested. But just to let you know, so the policymaking functions of being a board member are partially fulfilled by sitting on board committees as well. The board has several committees through which it may conduct its business. These committees and their current makeups are, and we have several committees. Should I just go through all of them? Okay, so I'm going to go through all of them and I'll kind of give you guys sort of a quick summary of what they are. You can think about it, and then if you're interested, you can let us know. So the first committee that we have is the Children's Vision Work Group. It currently is made up with Uni Linden and Jeffrey Garcia. This committee was originally created in 2016 in response to legislative efforts to address gaps in providing eye exams to elementary school students. Our next committee is the Consumer Protection, Public Relations, and Outreach Committee. It also has Uni Linden, she's chair on this committee, and Jeffrey Garcia. And we have one more vacant spot on this committee. And this committee assists the board and staff in developing outreach strategies to further our mission of consumer protection. Our next committee is Legislation and Regulation Committee. I'm currently chair, and Jeffrey Garcia and Uni Linden are also on this committee. And we have another vacant spot. And this committee assists the board in policy development and analysis. Our next committee is the NBEO ARBO Work Group. I'm currently on this committee, and we do have another vacant spot on this committee. The National Board of Examiners in Optometry and the Association of Regulatory, Regulatory Boards of Optometry are national groups that provide exams and assistance to boards, as well as continuing education services to licensees. The next committee that we have is the Optometry and Optician Practice Act Work Group. This entire committee is currently vacant. And then this committee assists the board with 2 practice acts, which the board regulates. Our next committee is the Practice and Education Committee, and Jeffrey Garcia is chair. I'm also on that committee, and we have another vacant spot on this committee. And then this committee reviews and approves all continuing education courses and providers that are not automatically approved pursuant to existing law contained in Business and Professions Code, Section 3059, and Title 16, California Code of Regulations, 1536. And our last committee is our Telehealth Work Group. Sandra Sims is currently on this committee, and we do have another vacant spot on this committee as well. And this committee assists the board with topic of telehealth and optometric services. The board member handbook, which is also included in today's materials, requires the board president, me, to solicit interest from the members during a public meeting. We have, as noted, we have several vacancies on most of our committees. So do any members right now want to express an interest in serving on any of these committees? Member Kleppa.
I think Consumer Affairs and possibly Legislation and Regulation.
Member Kleppa, just to clarify, do you mean Consumer Protection Committee?
Yes, Consumer Protection.
Thank you.
Thank you. And are any other members, do they want to say, express interest in any other committees right now? Dr. Bragg?
I would be interested in helping out the telehealth work group, the optometry and optician practice work group, and then the leg reg and consumer protection as well.
Right. Well, thank you both. And so Dr. Garcia, Greg, Ms. Linden, and we will all we'll take into consideration your interest, and then we'll have committee appointments that will be announced at our December meeting. So at this point, are there any public comments from the audience? And Madam Moderator, are there any public comments via phone?
This is the moderator, and if there are any comments from those logged into WebEx, you may indicate by raising your hand by clicking on the hand icon, or you may click on the question mark icon, type the word comment in that text box and click send, and our call-in users may press *3 to raise their hands. Are there any requests for comment? I do not see any requests. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
I have a question for the chair, if I may ask. I wasn't sure where on the agenda to bring this up, so maybe I'll just inquire and you can tell me the appropriate point. I did note something in the meeting minutes, not an objectionable point, but a point I wanted to ask a question about. When would be a good time to ask that question?
Council, I'm kind of looking maybe for you for some assistance here, as I think we already passed that item.
Yeah.
Would we bring that up at the future agenda items?
Yes, if we've already passed the meeting minutes portion of the agenda, that would probably be the best place for it.
That's fair. Thank you.
Very good.
All right, so if there's no other comments, we are now going to move on to item 4C, which is our 2023 ARBO meeting report. Former board member Dr. Glenn Kawaguchi attended the ARBO meeting, and he is here via phone to give us a report.
And Dr. Kawaguchi, this is the moderator. You are free to unmute yourself whenever you'd like. And you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Hello, board members.
Hi,
Thank you. We can hear you.
Glenn.
All right, so Association of Regulatory Boards of Optometry has an annual meeting in June. The ARBO customer is the state and jurisdiction boards of optometry in North America mainly. So whereas you serve the consumers of California, their service is to all of you boards. With President Wong's approval, I attended as your delegate this past June. In addition, I'm a director on the ARBO board and I am your liaison for California. So if there's any issues or any questions that you have, you can direct them through me and I can get it to the appropriate person for answers. The meeting took place over the course of about 2.5 days, and so I'm going to be tasked with trying to summarize the key points within 12 to 15 minutes. So just bear with me. If I miss you and you have a question, I'll stop at the end to make sure that you can ask any questions you might have for me. All right, so I'm going to start off with the subject of NBEO, which is the National Board Examiners in Optometry. For those of you who are new to the board, during the pandemic, it spurred many questions about access for California residents or licensee candidates to travel all the way to the East Coast, Charlotte, North Carolina, to take part 3 of their boards. The question was raised both about temporary test location as well as a permanent test location somehow in the west half of the US. With those questions that California as well as other states brought up, the NBEO did conduct studies, and I did have a chance to briefly speak with the director of the NBEO at the meeting, and she let me know that they completed the studies on both permanent and temporary secondary locations in the West, and they concluded that it's not cost effective for the program. So as of right now, they closed the study and they are no longer considering a secondary location, whether temporary or permanent. Second subject related to the NBEO is the clinical exam part 3. So currently, but only for a short amount of time more. Part 3 is called the Clinical Skills Exam. It's going to be changing to the Patient Encounters and Performance Skills Exam. Short acronym is PEPS. There's no specific go live date yet. However, there are statutory changes that you may want to consider. I looked over our statutes, and 1523 as well as 1531 may need to be addressed. And they mentioned clinical skills exams specifically. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. Okay, are there any questions on NBEO?
Hey, Glenn, this
Okay.
is Jeff Garcia. I have a question. So
Go ahead.
I appreciate the fact that they did consider a West Coast site as an alternative and did the study. But I still think that's something that we should still push for, just because we never know when the next national disaster, pandemic is going to occur. So, I mean, we already know what happened with COVID. So I just think it would be prudent for us to consider still pushing for that in the future. In addition, it's also just good customer service, and the customers, are the students in that situation. I think, for those 3 reasons, it would be something to keep on the agenda. Thank you.
If you would like, I can always be a liaison to see if there's somebody from NBEO that can attend a future board meeting to express that and to get additional information about the decisions that were made.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Glenn,
right.
this is
Go ahead.
Lillian. Also, like if they've determined that they can't do a permanent West Coast site, perhaps you could just bring to their attention, they did have emergency plans for other test alternatives during, let's say, another pandemic that they had initiated when we started our discussions with them. I haven't heard anything else about those, let's say, secondary plans. So if they can't do a permanent site, perhaps we could follow up on those emergency plans that they had talked about at the beginning.
So their emergency plans relate more to their established locations as opposed to a secondary location.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Anything else? Okay. Next subject is diversity, equity, inclusion. So Associated Regulatory Boards of Optometry did create its first DEI statement and encourages state boards to consider similar. In addition, by a delegate, it was raised that there could be an opportunity to include the subject as a CE requirement in the states. Okay, next subject is Selmo, which stands for the Council on Endorsed Licensure Mobility for Optometrists. It was a program established to ease the burden of a licensee to move state to state. It's currently an underutilized program. I'm currently on that committee, and we're going to be working to improve it based on feedback from the meeting to make it more valuable to state boards. There's a benefit both to boards as well as licensees, so we're going to continue to try to improve that program. Any questions on either of those 2 subjects?
No questions.
Okay, I'll move on to the Judicial Committee report. So for some of you that attended the last meeting, we discussed the passing of Dr. Ken Lawenda, who served on the California State Board of Optometry for many years. In addition, he served on many other leadership organizations across optometry in North America and Canada. And the Judicial Committee proposed to honor Ken Lawenda as honorary president of ARBO for 2023 and 2024. This was passed unanimously by the delegates of ARBO. The next subject is related to regulatory updates, and this is going to tie into the next subject after that as well. So regulatory updates, the main updates that were discussed were telehealth. And my key takeaway was brought by the ARBO Council, and that was a recommendation for states working on legislation or maybe working on legislation in the future around telehealth to clarify in-person exam, the in-person exam requirements. And the 2 points to consider are a need to determine where care is given, and number 2, is care within the statute scope of practice? So there's a lot of attachments to those 2 broad questions. I'm sure that many of you can imagine that already. But it was just food for thought, and it helps kind of guide to make sure that even current statutes are protecting consumers. All right, so moving on to the separate subject, but same subject, which was telehealth. Separately, we had a guest speaker, John White, MD, MPH from WebMD, and he did an overview of telehealth trends. And so I'm just going to go over some of the points that he raised that I thought were interesting. Telehealth usage trend has been decreasing from the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. The type of telehealth trends, as far as the top 5 that are used, were COVID, mental health, UTI, hypertension, and the 5th, which was a surprise to all of us in the room, was eye disease. So eye disease made it into the top 5. He discussed that audio still makes up 40% compared to audio versus video. So audio only still makes up 40% of telehealth. People under 65 are 4 times more likely to use telehealth. Affluent have a higher usage rate. Insurance payment parity is a major force influencing telehealth currently. Standard of care should be a major aspect of telehealth, but so far not a lot of discussion is going on in this regard. And then how will we consider AI usage and responsibility? And there's an example related to that was given. An OD, an optometrist, may have a website with a QA system, Q&A system that connects answers from possibly ChatGTP, and let's say things go wrong. Who's responsible? What's the risk to patients and consumers? All right, so that was just a presentation given to us, but any questions so far around telehealth? I'm going to move on to the next subject.
It doesn't look like we have any questions here in the room.
Okay, great. The next topic in the meeting was current legal issues in optometry. The main issue that was brought up in this session by ARBO's counsel was related to the state of Louisiana. There's a lawsuit going on in the state of Louisiana. The State Board of Optometry and the Louisiana Optometric Association having co-mingling staff servicing both. So for those of you new to the board, the core customer of a state board is consumers. In my experience, the core customer of an optometric association is the optometrist. And so that's where the question was raised. Is there potential conflict? Some states have statutes in place that prevent leadership positions in both. All right, any questions, discussions on that? Okay, I'll move on to the Model Practice Act. So ARBO is currently working through a draft of a Model Practice Act. The reason for a Model Practice Act would be to create example uniformity and clarity of language, to help ease of licensure mobility, a resource for scope expansion, and telehealth protections. So basically the draft looks like optometry statutes for a specific or given state as an example. In addition to that, it has wording rationale as comments along the side of the draft currently. So as time goes on, it just would be a resource for California if you want to take a look at that. As we know, some states have broader scope than we do currently. And so as we go through scope expansion, it could be a source of help. In addition, the committee that's working on that Model Practice Act asked for feedback. And so you do have access to it. And so you can always take a look at that act by looking at the website or the draft. If you can't find it, just let me know. And if there's feedback of changes or suggestions that you have for that Model Practice Act, it can be included in the draft. Okay, any questions on that?
Actually, I have a question, if I might. My question is, you indicated that the Model Practice Act seems to be set up in a legislative format. Are they going to be giving examples or model codes that can be adopted as is by a legislature if the board, let's say, endorsed it or the legislature wanted to adopt it? Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, the next subject, we had a guest speaker, Dr. Rick Castillo. He's both an OD and a DO, so a doctor of osteopathic medicine. And his talk to us was, what is surgery? So what counts as surgery and who gets to define it? A couple examples he brought up were radio frequency technology or cryo as examples. And how do boards of optometry protect consumers with new procedures coming out all the time? I know personally, for me as a former board member, I sometimes raise the question, not just with potential surgical procedures, but sometimes drugs or treatments. Our abilities continue to expand, the scope continues to need to expand. And so he just spoke to us and gave us a lot of food for thought about making sure that we're thinking about these things because it is an important aspect to protecting consumers of our states. In addition, Dr. Castillo was recently hired by the NBO. So he's going to be in a new role serving on the NBEO. I look forward to his addition to that organization. Okay, any questions on that?
No questions.
Okay, great. So that's pretty much my summary. I just wanted to speak about one last broad thing, and that is the next ARBO or Association of Regulatory Boards of Optometry meeting, annual meeting. So California, as we all know, is one of the largest states as far as optometry count, as far as consumer count. And I think it's critical that we remain involved with ARBO. Not only can we learn from information that ARBO provides and services they provide, but also we can be support to other states across North America. The next meeting is June 16th through the 18th. It's going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. I know that there's budgetary restrictions. I would encourage the board to consider the value of attending the meeting with at least 2 people attending. I think there's value in both an executive officer as well as the president attending the meeting. In addition to that, there's voting that goes on. Behind the scenes, when you have an in-person meeting, there's a lot of discussions that will happen between EOs, state to state, or board officers, state to state. And it's really interesting information. Got a lot out of just attending lunches and sitting next to different people at the meeting. And for those of you who aren't really familiar with ARBO as a whole, the ARBO website is arbo.org, and it'll show you the different support systems that they have for state boards. I noticed that Dr. Wong, there's a new committee founded, that ARBO/NBEO committee. Just to clarify, ARBO and NBEO are separate but connected entities. It's very difficult to explain that in a short amount of time, so I'll just state that. But I would be more than happy to be your liaison if there's information that you need, support that you need, questions that you have. You can just shoot me an email and I could always forward it to the correct person. Just make sure that you follow Robert's Rules of Orders related to communication with me as board members. Okay. So that's all I had. If there's any broad questions, I'd be open to that.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Kawaguchi? No, no questions. Thank you, Glenn. We really appreciate you attending the meeting and also giving us such a fantastic report.
You're welcome.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye, everybody.
Bye. I'm just going to go ahead and open it up for public comment from people in the room. No public comments in the room. Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones for public comment.
Certainly, we've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If anyone would like to make a comment, you may either raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, or you can click on the question mark icon, type the word comment, and click send. And our call-in users may press *3 to raise their hand. Any questions or comments on the presentation? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on to item number 5, which is the Department of Consumer Affairs update. First, we will hear from a representative from the DCA Executive Office, Ms. Karina Moreno. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Karina Moreno of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and I thank you for this opportunity to join you today. On behalf of the department, I would like to welcome Stacy Bragg, Robert Kleppa, and Paul Su to the Board of Optometry. I would also like to thank all members who continue to serve on the board and protect the public. To begin this morning, I'd like to provide an update for Diversion, Equity, and Inclusion, also referred to as DEI. On May 12, 2023, DCA's DEI Steering Committee held its quarterly meeting in person and elected a chairperson, Yafana Lamar, who currently serves at the department's tribal liaison and is the chief of legislation for the Contractors State Licensing Board, and vice chairperson, Paul Sanchez, who is the executive officer of the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology Board. The committee discussed training, strategic planning, and DEI activities through the end of the calendar year. Providing employees access to DEI training is a priority for the DEI Steering Committee. In June, DCA began offering 3 DEI courses, which are available to all DCA employees. The courses are Understanding the Value of DEI in the Workplace, How to Decode Our Unconscious Bias, and Unleash the Power of Generational Differences. The response from employees to participate in these new DEI learning opportunities has been significant, with high registration and attendance numbers. The DEI Steering Committee is pleased to announce that outside consultant Dr. Bernard Gibson will provide an in-person DEI training to DCA managers, supervisors, and leaders in October. In addition, Dr. Gibson will provide virtual training to board members on the morning of October 9th, 2023. Dr. Gibson has 20 years corporate experience managing teams and training employees in business effectiveness. Dr. Gibson also has extensive teaching experience at various colleges, including serving at adjunct facility since 2006 at University of Massachusetts for the School of Business and Professional Studies. Information on registering for this virtual event will be sent out soon. For those that cannot make the training portion will be recorded and be available later. I look forward to updating you in the months ahead on the progress of the DEI Steering Committee. Moving on to in-person meetings and the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. The changes to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act that allowed board members to not have to notice their meeting's location or meet in an ADA accessible location expired on July 1st, 2023. Therefore, as of July 1st, 2023, public meetings are subject to the traditional pre-COVID requirements for open meetings. DCA boards and bureaus should be prepared to conduct public meetings compliant with Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. This includes whether a meeting is held at a single centralized location or at multiple teleconference locations. Each physical meeting location will need to be identified in the meeting public notices and agendas. Board members must attend meetings in person at the notice meeting locations. All notice meeting locations, including locations where a single board member will be, must be ADA accessible, have an agenda posted, and be open to the public. The public will be permitted to attend these meetings at any notice meeting location. Additionally, members of the public need to be able to hear the meeting and participate in public comment from each location. DCA has a Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act guide available and has provided your executive officer or bureau chief with a list of available meeting locations throughout the state. Please reach out to board and bureau relations with any questions or concerns. DCA is committed to helping the boards to make this a smooth transition. SB 544, which may allow for some meetings to be held without noticing the location of the board members, thus allowing remote virtual meetings, is still going through the legislative process, and the department's Division of Legislative Affairs is working with stakeholders and providing updates to the boards and bureaus on the status of this bill. Next, I would like to share an update related to military spouses and domestic partners temporary licensure. DCA has worked to implement AB 107, SALIS 2021, effective July 1st, 2023. DCA boards and bureaus, unless otherwise exempt, are required to grant temporary licensures to the spouse or domestic partner of an active duty military member stationed in California, if the spouse or domestic partner holds a licensure in another state with the same scope of practice as the profession in California for which they would like to practice. DCA's Office of Information Services and Communications Division have been working to support the implementation. All boards and bureaus were recently provided an outreach toolkit to help share the message of this new benefit to military spouses. DCA has also updated its military resources website to reflect this new benefit as well. Moving on to the Enlightened Enforcement Project. The department is continuing working on the Enlightened Enforcement Project that is being piloted by the Dental Board of California. The Dental Board has walked through their intake complaint processes, citation and investigation processes. One more walkthrough session will cover the discipline and probation processes. The goal is for staff to walk through the processes with subject matter experts, so improvements and efficiencies can be found for the Dental Board that can be carried over to other boards too. The project also aims to learn best practices between boards and standardized procedures for all of boards and bureaus. The final benefit will also be a template for policies and procedures related to the enforcement process for all boards to utilize. Next is the Data Governance Project. DCA is continuing its efforts to improve its reports regarding licensing and enforcement activities. The director recently led multiple work group meetings beginning in late April through early July with staff from each board and bureau to update the data metrics reported in DCA's annual report. DCA's goal is to ensure consistency between the report data in the annual report, DCA's data portal, and board and bureau sunset reports. Future meetings are expected in August and ongoing to help build new reports or modify existing ones to provide these new metrics for the next year's annual report. Additionally, DCA held a meeting on July 17th with all boards and bureaus to review guidance on how boards and bureaus can compile and report data to the department for inclusion in this year's upcoming annual report. Next, I will share information related to the press release translations. To further the department's efforts to reach the Californians we serve, DCA will request boards and bureaus to translate any press releases they issue into Spanish. California's top non-English language spoken is Spanish, and establishing a standard of translating releases into both English and Spanish will enhance the reach of information released. Boards and bureaus are also encouraged to evaluate any additional languages outside of Spanish that may serve their audiences. For additional information, please contact BBR. Next, I have a board member onboarding reminder related to oath of office. Board members who have been appointed and reappointed cannot begin their service or perform any official functions without first taking the oath of office. Unless otherwise provided, the oath may be taken before any officer authorized to administer oaths. Board members should contact their executive officer to arrange taking the oath of office. Board members will be required to complete the documents listed on the board member appointment checklist, or HR 5, and return them to the Office of Human Resources no less than 30 days after their appointment or reappointment. Duties cannot be assumed and appointments cannot be processed until documents are received and are accurately completed. Incomplete packets may delay per diem payments and travel reimbursements to the member. Moving on to required board member training. There are two DCA-wide mandatory trainings for 2023. This includes sexual harassment prevention training and information security awareness. All DCA employees and appointees, including board and advisory council members, will need to complete the sexual harassment prevention training this year. Board members must take the 2-hour supervisory training, and advisory council members must take the 1-hour non-supervisory training. This training is required every odd-numbered year and is online, self-paced, in approximately 2 hours. Board members will be assigned, or board members with an assigned DCA email are required to complete the Information Security Awareness Fundamentals training. The training addresses everyone's roles in protecting DCA's data and information. The training is online and required every year. Both the sexual harassment prevention training and the information security awareness training are available in the department's learning management system. If board members need assistance in accessing the LMS system and these trainings, please reach out to Board and Bureau Relations. Next, a reminder related to board member travel. Please keep in mind that all state travel arrangements must be made through DCA's authorized travel agency, Cal Travel Store, or Concur. When traveling by air in official state business, all board members and staff must use the most economical fares possible. If the flights change, there may be additional charges. Flight changes for personal convenience are not permitted or justified, and the traveler is responsible for any associated charges. Please contact BBR if you have any travel questions. 2023-24 out-of-state travel update. The Attorney General issued a press release adding 3 new states to California's restricted travel list with staggered effective dates in 2023-2024 as follows. Wyoming, travel restricted effective July 14th, 2023. Missouri, travel restricted effective August 28th, 2023. And Nebraska, travel restricted effective October 1st, 2023. If you have any questions, please reach out to your executive officer for additional information. Finally, I would like to provide a board member orientation training reminder, also referred to as BMOT. Board members must complete BMOT within 1 year of their appointment or reappointment. On October 10th, 2023, BMOT will be offered virtually. This will be the last meeting of the year, and members can register for this training via LMS. Thank you again for the opportunity to present this DCA update, and at this time, I will hand it back to the President Wong and welcome any questions from the board.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
No. Board members, do any of you have any questions? No questions?
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to item number 5B. We're going to hear from the representative from DCA's Budget Office, Ms. Karen Munoz or Ms. Sarah Hinkle, or both of them. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sarah Hinkle, and I'm the DCA Budget Analyst for the board, and I'm here with our DCA Budget Officer, Karen Munoz. And I want to welcome all our new board members and also thank the board and the executive staff for allowing me a few minutes to provide you information on the budget process and an update to the board's budget. So first, I wanted to go over the budget annual process and how it relates to the board's fund and appropriation. So the budget process is a statewide process to how a budget is developed and ultimately enacted into law for state departments to adhere to on an annual basis. The first stage of this process is the development of the governor's budget, which occurs in the fall, and it's released on January 10th. The governor's budget, it's planned a year ahead. So for example, the recent release was for the fiscal year 23-24. And during this stage, we would use the board's existing budget as a baseline to incrementally adjust it based on instructions provided by the Department of Finance. And typically, these are through budget letters. Some examples of adjustments that can impact the board's appropriation are salaries and benefit adjustments, and that these occur each year, or these could be budget change proposals. So for the second stage, once the governor's budget is released on January 10th and introduced to the legislator, the budget office then assists the governor's administration to walk the legislator through various adjustments that are being proposed. An example of this would be assisting and supporting the board in explaining their budget change proposals if any proposal was submitted. And once the legislator approves the governor's proposed budget, the budget is signed into law for upcoming fiscal year, which is known as the Budget Act. For example, the current budget was enacted into law in June 2023 per Chapter 12, Statutes of 2023, SB 101. And the final stage is the implementation of the budget, and all boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs are supported by at least one special fund, the Optometry's fund being 763. A special fund is an account which is separate from the state's general fund in which specified revenue is deposited. The main revenue source for most boards are fees assessed to licensees. Additionally, the board's special fund is the source from which all authorized board expenditures are made. It's also important to note that the board's fund balance is different from what the board is authorized to spend in any given year. As referenced earlier, the board's budget appropriation is the budget approved in the Annual Budget Act, which becomes the appropriation for the corresponding fiscal year. An appropriation is the total amount of funds for which a board can make payments out of their special fund. So it's important to remember boards are expressly prohibited from making expenditures in excess of this annual appropriation. And it's also important to note any reversions from the board's appropriation, so these are savings from the board's authorized expenditures in the fiscal year, these are reverted back to the fund and not rolled over to the next year's appropriation. As a reminder, board members have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure the board maintains expenditures within their authorized appropriation and can do so by reviewing the board's budget reports and expenditure projections on a routine basis. So that's our budget process. Now I'll move into the documents that have been provided. As part of the board's meeting materials, I've included the board's fund condition and expenditure documents, and these are the documents that I'm going to be discussing. And you can refer to these agenda item 5BI. I'll be going over through these documents. So first, I'm going to start with page 2, the board's expenditure projections. These projections are based on actual data through fiscal month 12. The purpose of this document is to provide the board with detailed expenditures through a point in time, and in this case, through the end of our prior fiscal year, June. So when reviewing this report, the top portion are the board's personal service expenses, followed by the board's operating expenses. And the green columns are the board's prior year actual data. And the first blue column is the board's budget, and the first orange column are the projections through year end. And as we move to the end of the document, you'll see the board had a beginning budget of just over 4 million. As of FM12, the board is projected to spend a little over 2.74 million with a projected reversion of just over 1.3 million. The budget office just received actuals for fiscal year 22-23, and I'll be providing an update to the board within the next week. And I don't anticipate the projections to change significantly from the numbers that are already being shared. So the next document now I'll be going over is the board's fund condition statement, which is page 1 of the documents. And the fund condition is current as of the 2023 Budget Act, and we read this document top to bottom and then left to right. So the left column are the board's prior year 22-23 prior year actuals. The board began 2023 with a beginning balance of just over 2 million, estimated to collect 2.6 million in revenue and expended 2.9 million. And at the bottom where it reads fund balance, the board has a 2.8 million reserve balance. And what that means is if the board were to no longer collect any revenues, the board would be the board would be able to operate for only 7.8 months. So for current year, since we're only at fiscal month 2 and we're still closing the prior year, we're projecting the board to bring in approximately 2.9 million in revenue and have assumed full budget appropriation of 4 million. After these assumed expenditures and any direct draws to the fund, the board has a current year fund balance of just over 1.3 million or 3.8 months in reserve. So a few things to note about the board's fund condition. This fund condition, it is a snapshot in time. The fund condition does not include any future increased licensing or enforcement expenditures, which could create additional cost pressures to the board's fund in out years by requiring additional resources to support the increase. Also, any future legislation or unanticipated events could result in the board's need for additional resources. This would increase pressures on the fund. The fund condition does not include the regulatory fee increase the board had previously approved and is anticipated to be effective July 1st, 2024. This will increase the board's fund by approximately 600,000, reducing the current structural fund imbalance. And then as mentioned before, the budget office will continue to monitor the board's fund condition statement and keep the lines of communication with board executive staff for any future needs or expectations. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you again for allowing me to be here to present the board's budget. Can now answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. That was very well done.
Hello, I have a couple questions. This is my first time on the board. This is a new document to me, so I want to be sure I understand what you're saying.
Sure.
Using the document that you were just referencing, as far as total revenues for the board for the, I guess, prior year is 3706. Did I read that correctly? Because you were using approximations, and I want to be sure that I was seeing the right line at the time you were approximating.
Mhm.
So was that the right number that it should be referencing for prior year?
The 3.706.
Six. Okay. And the current year is the expected amount, 2877?
So if you're looking.
You got to turn it on. There you go.
Okay,
There you go.
sorry.
No problem.
So if you're looking at the fund condition statement and you're looking at the first column prior year, your revenues that we're expecting to come in based on fiscal month 12 actuals is 2.5, almost 2.6 million. There is a revenue transfer from the RDO's fund that's coming in, or actually it has already hit. So your total revenue, including that transfer, will be 3.7 million. So I want to just make that clarification that your revenue from licensees and such is 2.56 million, and then another 1.1 from the RDO.
Okay, so does the RDO transfer represent a one-time transfer? Or is that expected to occur in additional moments in the future?
No, it's a one-time, we're closing out that fund completely. We held it open for a couple years just to make sure no additional funds would hit there. And once that happened, we just closed it out and we'll be transferring the funds on a one-time. That fund will completely be abolished.
Okay, is there another fund that might take its place, or we're just stuck with whatever revenues we bring in on our own?
The two funds had merged, so the revenues from both the RDO licensees and optometries.
Karen and Member Kleppo, this 1.14 million transfer from the RDO fund is a legacy or carryover, if you will. Prior to 2017, the RDO program did not exist at the Board of Optometry. It existed at another board, and legislation moved that program over to our board. And when that happens, the funds ultimately get merged. So that 1.14, that number that you see, is not new revenue that came in. It already existed in that fund and was transferred. And so there is no new fund or new revenue transfer expected in any future years. That's a one-time only occurrence.
Okay, does that mean that the funds that were in that other fund, that the revenue stream that filled up that other fund now comes to the board directly?
Correct.
Okay, so we don't expect additional amounts because we're already getting it directly.
Correct.
Now I understand. Thank you. Okay, so that's the total revenue. I think I now understand that. So those numbers, as I can see as we go along from left to right, now equal total revenue from revenues directly received down at the bottom, total revenue received. So they're now the same numbers going from left to right. That makes sense. And total expenditures won't be changing, though we're expecting to receive additional revenue if the revenue request is granted. Is that correct? In other
So
words,
we
if
have,
the fee increase that was.
correct. Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about the status of that proposal in a future item, but to say what I can say about it now here, that's correct. We have a regulatory fee proposal that we're working on. And we anticipate that being effective July 1, which is tied to the new fiscal year. And if that is successful and happens, we would be receiving additional revenues pursuant to that proposal beginning July 1 of next year.
All right, so those proposed or projected revenues are not reflected yet on these charts, are they?
Correct. They're not reflected on this chart.
Okay, going on to the second document that you referenced, the actual use of the money, the budget, the various things. I just wanted to gain a better understanding of what this represents. So the first chart, this is going from left to right, the first column, prior year, is any of those funds still being expended? Or has that already been expended?
So how accounting works is that we keep our fiscal years open for 3 years. So you do have a balance because this is not opened up. I don't know what the budget was, but any reversions you had in prior year stays open for 3 years before we completely close out that year, just in case additional invoicing or something comes in for charges that were incurred in that year. So we do keep that open, but the reversions do go back to the fund. It is not monies that are transferred to the following year, so you can increase appropriation spend to it. It just goes back to the fund.
All right, now the last column on the far right that says balance, could you repeat again what that represents?
The balance is just the difference between what you're budgeted and what you're projected to expend. So that gives you a balance of, so you're budgeted just a little over $4 million, you're spending 2.7 million, your balance is 1.2. That is the expected amount that would be reverting back to your fund once we close out the fiscal year.
And when you say reverting back to your fund, is that the general fund?
It'll be your fund, the Board of
reserves.
Optometry's fund 0763.
Okay.
So your reserve. correct.
Our reserves. All right, thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions?
Oh, I have a question. This is Member Linden. In case I missed her, just to clarify, the increase in renewal fee revenue between the prior year and the current year. I'm sorry, could you explain that increase?
Are you referring to the transfer that we received from the RDO?
Or it was like 2 million and then it goes up by like 400,000. The
Are you,
expenditures.
you, oh, why we go from 2.56 to 2.877?
Yeah.
You want me to address that? Okay.
Please.
So right now, we're projecting 2.5, 2.6 million for the 22-23. The 23-24 is what we are identifying currently in the Budget Act. We do reassess the board's revenue projections every year in the fall. We'll be doing that actually in the next couple months to see if there's been any trend changes as such. And if that happens, that number may decrease, it may increase based on any trends or any increased revenues that the board has been seeing coming through. So it is a projection based through last fall's budget building, and we'll be adjusting that in the fall.
Member Linden and rest of the board members, just to piggyback off what Karen said, when I started here at this board, my first meeting was in December, and we were looking at these budget numbers. I believe our budget documents at that time showed we were anticipating a little over 3 million in revenues. And working with the budget office and their team, that number was revised downward to to where it's essentially it shows today, 2.5, 2.6. Part of that, as we talked about at prior meetings, involved some overestimates that staff had offered, if you will. It also was partially a reflection of the fact that some of our regulatory proposals that had a revenue component, like the mobile office permit program, for example, or the home residence permit program, had not been implemented. And so that revenue that we had anticipated to receive was not being received. So as Karen said, it's possible that this 2.8 number could go downward. It could also go upward.
This is Member Bragg. I did have a question similar to the revenue change about the expenditures for the 1111, where it goes from 2.7
Yeah.
to 4.0. Specifically, is that related to the new regulations, the mobile optometric, in implementing that, or is that something different?
No, so the 4 million number that you see for 23, 24, and then 4.1, 4.2, 4.4, which just represents, I believe, like a 3% growth calculator that the budget office does. That's what we're authorized to expend in our budget. What you see for prior years, we actually spent significantly less than that, really 2.94, right? The main reason why we were able to spend such a significant amount less than what we were authorized to spend is due to the fact that we have a lot of vacancies and we're achieving salary savings. So a significant bulk of our savings, if you will, or reversion to our fund is a result of the salary savings. And you can see some of that visualized on the subsequent chart when you look at permanent positions budget 1.3 million, and we spent almost half that. So you didn't answer this question, but if you were to ask me if I think we're going to spend 4 million in the next fiscal year, I would say probably not, because I don't anticipate fully expending our budget again, given the fact that we know we're going to bring in significantly less than that 4 million number. So we're trying to manage that at the same time pursuing the fee increase to help bring in some more revenue.
Yeah, I have a question on the anticipated revenue increase next year. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers right now. I think we still have a deficit, even with the increase.
You're absolutely correct. So the regulatory proposal that we're engaged in at the moment is to raise our existing fees to cap. So the law and statute only authorizes the fee to be charged at a ceiling. And currently our fee is below that in several categories. And so our proposal is to increase those fees not at cap to their statutory cap. In doing that, however, the calculations show we're only going to bring in about 600,000. And if you're looking at the math, that's about what our structural deficit was, right? We spent about 3 million. We brought in about 2.5. So it's really, really tight, right, on that revenue increase in terms of solving our problem. It won't solve our problem. And on top of the fee regulatory proposal, we'll have to, as a board, engage in a fee study, which is a process that we will engage on with the budget office. It produces essentially a document and a study to help inform what the future fees should be. Are the current statutory caps in any of the categories, adequate? Should they be adjusted up or down? So we're going to have to be engaged in that effort as well, because we recognize that the regulatory proposal won't on its own solve the problem.
Thank you.
Oh, can I just make one quick, I know that there's some new board members here, but if Greg wants to maybe just mention real fast, the last time we had any type of increase in fees, because I know it's been a while, that might be helpful for.
Sure. Yeah. So it's been quite a while. Now, if you recall what I said a few moments ago in regards to the RDO program, that was a program that did not exist with us until about 7 years ago. So that program, when it came over to us in 2016, 2017, had a fee increase that happened. This is on the optician side of our program. So the spectacle lens dispensers, the contact lens dispensers, the registered dispensing ophthalmic businesses, they had some statutory fee increases that happened when that program was brought over to us. On the optometry side, and the fee that is the main driver of our revenue is the biennial renewal fee for optometry, for an optometrist. That fee has not been raised. And remember, Lyndon kind of put me on the spot. So if I get this number wrong, 14 years, 16 years, something like that. Yeah, more than a decade since the biennial renewal fee for an optometrist has been raised. Currently, it's $425. Statute, if I remember, is capped at $500. So that biennial renewal fee has not been raised from $425 in quite some time. There are a few other fees that we're also proposing to raise, but they're not the bulk of the revenue component for this program. So just a little bit of history. Appreciate that. It's a great question, Member Lyndon. It's been more than a decade on the optometry side and about 6-7 years on the opticianry side.
Yeah, I have another question regarding the expenditures. Our expenditures, are we going to be able to look at what expenditure that we can actually reduce?
So it's something we're always looking at. We have very little room to cut, just to be blunt about it. The main component of our expenditures are personnel, right? Salaries and benefits. And the main tool that you have as a program to manage that aspect of your fund is when you have vacancies. And so if salaries and benefits are the main expenditure of your fund, the main savings that you can achieve is to not spend in that area. And the main way that you can not spend in that area is to hold a vacant position open. Now, obviously, you have to be mindful and careful of how you do that, right? You can't hold every vacant position open forever at the detriment of your mandate and consumer protection and processing times, right? So we are carrying a pretty heavy vacancy rate at the moment, not necessarily on purpose for salary savings. We've had 2 people recently in the last month or 2 just promote or retire. So we're not necessarily holding anything open for that reason. We're actively trying to fill there. But outside of salaries and benefits, there's very little room that a program has to really, make changes, if you will, or reduce expenditures. Attorney general costs are part of our consumer protection enforcement mandate, right? And that eats up a big chunk of a lot of programs' budgets as well. Where we can, though, we are trying, right? I will say we were able to save a lot of money being able to meet hybrid in a virtual environment prior to July 1. It's not a lot of money, but we didn't expend about $28,000, $30,000 of our travel budget last year. So that's some savings, right? Other opportunities maybe around printing costs or just be careful about ordering supplies and things like that. But those are really, on the margins. Again, the bulk of your costs and expenditures are on the salary benefit side. So holding positions open is the main way that you can achieve those savings. And Member Sue and for all the new board members, about a year ago at the beginning of the prior fiscal year, so this meeting last year, we were facing about $1 million structural deficit. We ended the year at about 400,000. And the reason for that was mostly because of the salary savings. So I hope that answers your concern or question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any other questions from our board members? Any questions from the public in the room? And Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones for public comment.
Certainly, if anyone has any questions on the Budget Office presentation, you may click on the hand icon to raise your hand. You may click on the question mark icon and then type the word comment into the text box there and click send. And any call-in users may press *3 to raise their hand. Each speaker will have 2 minutes with a 30-second warning. Any comments on the budget report? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. That was a wonderful report.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, now we're going to move on to item number 5C. We will hear from a representative of the DCA Office of Professional Examination Services regarding the occupational analysis of the optometric assistant profession and scope of practice of opticianry. Before they begin, I just want to make a few comments about the study. This study is one of a series of studies the board has initiated over the past several years, including an occupational analysis of both the spectacle lens dispenser and contact lens dispenser professions received in 2020. In our 2021-2025 strategic plan, which was released in November of 2020, we stated the following. The board thoroughly discussed the roles of unlicensed individuals working as optometric assistants. Working with DCA and the legislature, the board obtained budgetary authority to conduct an occupational analysis of the optometric assistant profession. The purpose of the study, as we will hear, is the purpose of the evaluation is to identify overlap in the scope of practice of 3 opticianry occupations: optometric assistant, spectacle lens dispenser, and contact lens dispenser, and to determine whether any health and safety concerns necessitate a new licensing systems. With that, I think we have 2 people who are going to give the report. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Heidi Linser. I'm the Chief of the Office of Professional Examination Services. And also here with me today is Amy Welsh-Gandy, OPS Research Data Supervisor. Welcome to the new board members. I've presented at your board in the past, but it's been a while. So some of you may remember me who have been here, but others, nice to see you. In this presentation, it's going to be a little data heavy. Apologies, a little wordy, and we'll try to answer any questions you have. Well, we need the next slide. So we'll try to answer questions that you have, knowing that we have new people who aren't familiar with OPES. But we will give a background first. We'll going to give you an overview of OPES, including the laws, professional standards, and guidelines that we follow. We will then review the scope of practice study that we did to evaluate the contact lens dispenser, spectacle lens dispenser, and the unlicensed optometric assistant professions. We'll discuss the purpose of occupational analysis and review the results of the occupational analyses that we did for those 3 professions. And then we will share the results of our evaluation of the overlap between the 3 professions. Finally, we'll provide conclusions and recommendations. And Amy is going to start off the presentation.
Next slide, please. One too far. See one
One-
before that. There we go. Okay, thank you. The Office of Professional Examination Services is part of the California Department of Consumer Affairs. We provide professional consulting services and examination development and validation to DCA's boards, bureaus, and committees. OPES's examination validation work and recommendations we make are designed to ensure that examinations conform to professional guidelines and technical standards. Section 139 of the Business and Professions Code provides the foundation for OPES's work and mandates that OPES develop policies to ensure DCA programs have valid and legally defensible examinations. Next slide. More specifically, this slide shows how DCA and OPES have implemented the mandates of Business and Professions Code Section 139. B&P Code 139 requires that licensing examinations be based on an occupational analysis of the profession and that licensing examinations meet technical standards for validity. DCA policy OPES 2201 specifies the 2014 standards published by the American Educational Research Association, American Psychological Association, National Council on Measurement and Education, and the technical standards to be followed when developing licensing examinations. DCA policy 2001 provides the information on how we select subject matter experts to participate in the exam development process. And DCA DPM OPES 2201 provides examination security guidelines. These laws, standards, and guidelines are critical for what we do at OPES and for all licensure examination programs within DCA. So the purpose of the scope of practice study was to identify the overlap in the scope of practice between contact lens dispensers, spectacle lens dispensers, and optometric assistants. The scope of practice study also aimed to determine whether any health and safety concerns would indicate a change to the 3 licensing classifications. In order to do this work, OPES began by conducting individual occupational analyses for each of the 3 occupations. Next slide, please. And then next slide. Thank you. Okay. The purpose of an OA is to define an occupation in terms of the critical tasks that practitioners must be able to perform safely and competently. Occupational analyses capture significant changes in a profession's tasks, job demands, scope of practice, equipment, technology, required knowledge, skills and abilities, or laws and regulations governing the profession. Next slide. This slide shows the steps of a typical occupational analysis. The occupational analysis survey consists of a list of tasks and a list of associated knowledge statements that are developed by subject matter experts, also called SMEs, who are typically licensed practitioners who work in the occupation being studied. Survey respondents are asked to rate how frequently they perform each task and how important performing each task is in the profession. The ratings are compiled, analyzed, and discussed with SMEs. Tasks with low ratings may be excluded from the final description of practice. We used this process for the CLD and the SLD OAs. We used a slightly different process for the optometric assistant OA, which we will discuss a little later. Next slide, please. In April 2019, on behalf of the board, OPES sent invitations to licensed CLDs in California who were in good standing with the board, and it was a total of 1,354 CLDs, inviting them to complete the OA questionnaire online. The final sample size for the data analysis reflects excluded respondents who indicated they were not currently licensed or practicing as CLDs in California. Although 11% may seem low, this is typical for OA surveys that OPES performs. Based on the sample's demographic composition, we believe the respondent sample is fairly representative of the population of California CLDs. Next slide, please. This slide shows the survey respondents' years registered as a CLD. You can see that there are approximately the same number of respondents in each slice of the pie, meaning that we had good representation for the various experience ranges. It is especially important to have good response from respondents with 0 to 5 years of experience. This helps us ensure that decisions based on the data reflect entry-level practice. Next slide, please. Regarding the education and training of CLDs, we can see that most of the respondents reported on-the-job training. Note that these are actual respondent numbers and not percentages. Next slide, please. In this slide, we can see that almost all CLDs who responded were also SLDs. Next slide, please. So moving on to the SLD occupational analysis. In 2020, OPES on behalf of the board, or in November 2019, on behalf of the board, OPES sent invitation letters by mail this time rather than online with the CLDs to the entire population of SLDs in good standing with the board. A total of 2,728 SLDs received the survey. The final sample size for the data analysis reflects excluded respondents who indicated they were not currently licensed and practicing as CLDs in California. OPES also excluded respondents who only filled out the demographic portion of the survey. Based on the sample's demographic composition, the respondents appear to be representative of the population of California SLDs. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. All right. Again, you can see consistent representation regarding the number of years registered, including the entry-level category of 0 to 5. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. For education and training of SLDs, we see a similar pattern to the CLD results in that on-the-job training is most frequently selected. And these are also the actual number of respondents rather than percentages. Next slide, please. In this slide, we see that SLDs are more likely to hold the registered dispensing optician license compared to the CLDs. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Linzer to talk about the optometric assistant OA process and the results.
Next slide. So after completing the CLD and SLD occupational analyses, the board requested that OPS complete the scope of practice study of the 3 opticianry professions. So at that point, we needed to identify the scope of work of the unregistered optometric assistant occupation. As part of an OA, we always review the Business and Professions Code to understand the legal description of the profession. So we have here part of the legal description. The part that was most relevant to us was the part, what we always look for specifications of what the scope of work is, what the occupation can and can't do. So here it explains fitting and adjusting of spectacle lenses under the direct responsibility and supervision of a duly registered SLD, and fitting and adjusting of contact lenses under the direct responsibility and supervision of a duly registered CLD. In addition, existing law authorizes an optometric assistant under the direct responsibility of the optometrist to perform subjective refraction procedures in connection with finalizing subjective refraction procedures, provided that they have at least 45 hours of training in subjective refraction procedures acceptable to the supervising optometrist. And I paraphrase that a little just to focus on optometry. There's other information related to ophthalmology, but we weren't focusing on that. Next slide. So because the board does not have contact information for the optometric assistants, we had to use a different strategy to find them. The board helped us identify optometric assistants to draft the initial tasks and knowledge statements, and then we contacted optometrists and asked them to forward the survey to their optometric assistants if they had any working for them. So we sent an email to 7,535 optometrists for whom the board had an email address on file. We do not know how many optometrists forwarded the invitation to optometric assistants working in their office. As you will see in the results, we do know that some CLDs and SLDs were given the survey and they completed it. So that tells us that the optometrists were not even sure who they had working in their office, if there were CLDs, SLDs, or unlicensed optometric assistants, or they just weren't paying attention and forwarded the survey. All responses were included in the analysis of demographic data. For evaluating the task and knowledge ratings, however, we removed the responses of those who said they had a CLD or SLD. That left only 33 of the 86 respondents who indicated that they did not possess CLD or SLD certifications, because we were trying to get to the work that was done by the unlicensed optometric assistants, or not certified. I use the word licensure generically. I know it's a certification, not a license. We were trying to clarify the work performed by the optometric assistants compared to the CLD and SLDs. Next slide. So this slide shows the respondent data, and remember this is all respondents, the 86. So this shows years working as an optometric assistant, and we we got a good response from the 0 to 5 years. Next slide. And this slide shows, like the other professions that we looked at, the education and training, and we see that on-the-job training is the most frequently selected response. Next slide. This question asked for certifications and registrations held by the respondents. Respondents were asked to select all that apply. And this is where we see that a large portion of the respondents were CLDs and SLDs. Next slide. So this slide, we wanted to present a summary of the demographic data indicating the overlap between the three professions. So note that the data for optometric assistant OA is based on a very low number of respondents. So we do not know if the sample is representative of the optometric assistant population in California. But what is important to note is the majority of CLDs, as Amy presented, who responded, 94% were also registered as SLDs. So already a lot of overlap between those two professions. However, only 20% of the SLDs who responded said that they were CLDs. 33% of the optometric assistants who responded are registered as CLDs, and 42% are registered as SLDs. And as I said, we took them out of the rest of the data analysis so we could try to get at the pure practice of the optometric assistants. Next slide. So we'll now look more specifically at the results of the optometric assistant OA. Keeping in mind the low number of respondents, we consider these results as a preliminary analysis of the optometric assistant profession. As Amy mentioned, when we do an OA survey, we ask respondents to rate the frequency and importance of task and knowledge statements. And the purpose of the ratings is to identify the essential task and knowledge required for safe and competent practice. So for the occupation, in this case, for the optometric assistant. The survey respondents are asked to provide frequency and importance ratings for the tasks using these scales. Next slide. And the respondents are asked to rate the knowledge statements for importance using this scale. Next slide. So in October of 2022, OPS test specialists facilitated a workshop with optometric assistant SMEs to finalize the description of practice. In the workshop, the SMEs discussed the essential tasks and knowledge required for safe and competent practice of the optometric assistant occupation. So they looked at the data that we had collected. They looked at the ratings, the task and knowledge ratings to look at the frequency and importance of the tasks and knowledge. They also linked each task to a knowledge statement and determined the content areas. Now, this is what happens in a typical OA. However, this OA was not typical, and there was a lack of consensus among the SMEs regarding several tasks that they said were not performed and should not be performed by optometric assistants. So remember, we had determined the tasks by asking a group of optometric assistants, small group value, and using the task knowledge we had developed from the CLD and SLD as sort of a jumping off point. And then we sent the survey out, and then we are getting survey responses saying these tasks and knowledges are being performed out in the field. However, when we get the group back together, they say they are not in consensus about these tasks and knowledges. Say, oh, they shouldn't be performing this. I can't believe they're performing that. And so this is not typical when we have a defined profession. Understand that that's because this is an unregistered, unlicensed profession. There is not a lot of consensus on what these people are doing. So due to the lack of consensus, in December 2022, OPS presented the list of tasks and knowledge to a group of 7 optometrists. So OPS, for you new board members, we develop your law and regs or law and ethics? Law and regs examination. So we were fortunate to have a group of subject matter experts, optometrists at our office, working on the law and regs exam. So we were able to appropriate some of their time, and we asked them to look at the tasks and knowledge for the optometric assistant to help us determine what should and shouldn't be on the list. And the optometrists indicated that only some of the tasks that were identified by the previous group are not performed by optometric assistants. So due to this lack of consensus between the different groups of SMEs, as well as the survey respondents, as some respondents indicated they do perform the tasks, OPS kept all the tasks on the final description of practice. Next slide. So this slide shows the summary of the we'll call it in quotes final, because I'm telling you this is preliminary, the final description of practice with a total of 74 tasks. And there were 4 additional tasks added to the patient assessment content area during the scope of practice study, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but just wanted to give you this breakdown here. So patient assessment consisted of 20 tasks, spectacle fitting, 24 tasks, contact lens evaluation, 16 tasks, broken down into initial evaluation, 10 tasks, and follow-up, 6 tasks. Office management, 14 tasks, broken down, and then inventory, broken down into inventory, 5 tasks, and record keeping, 9 tasks. The 4 tasks that were added to patient assessment, and they were related to doing that subjective refraction that we talked about earlier. Okay, next slide. So the next phase of the project was to evaluate the overlap between the 3 professions. So OPS conducted a workshop to discuss the scope of practice of the optometric assistants. And this, we had a workshop with 2 optometrists, 2 SLDs, and 4 SLDs and CLDs. We could not get any optometric assistants for this workshop. So the SMEs began by discussing all the tasks in the description of practice and whether they should be performed by optometric assistants, CLDs, or SLDs. And when determining whether specific tasks should be performed by the optometric assistants, CLDs, or SLDs, the SMEs considered specific knowledge and training and whether performing the task posed a safety concern to patients. So based on this discussion, 25 tasks on the optometric assistant description of practice were identified as tasks that are safety concerns and should only be performed by CLDs or SLDs. Also, the 4 additional tasks that I talked about were identified as missing from the optometric assistant description, and we added those, and those were included on the previous slide. Next slide. So here we have the tasks that were identified that should be only performed by SLDs or CLDs. Now remember, they were on the list because optometric assistants along the way of this process had mentioned that they were doing them or that they could do them. And I'm not going to go through all these. I mean, you're free. But just to know that there's 25 and the SMEs believe that the optometric assistants did not possess the necessary knowledge and training to safely perform them. But I'll give you guys a minute to go through them if you want to look at the specifics. And this lack of consensus is why we are considering the results of the OA preliminary. OPS believes that an additional evaluation is necessary to clarify the scope of work for the optometric assistants. You can go to the next slide. It continues with the tasks that were identified as problematic. And then the next slide shows additional tasks. And you see they crossed all content areas, even office management. And next slide. So as part of the scope of practice workshop, the SMEs discussed what changes would increase public safety. The SMEs noted that many other states require optometric assistants to be registered either with a board or with a Department of Health. In addition to establishing a clear definition of the role of optometric assistants, the SMEs believed that board registration would ensure that optometric assistants work within their scope of practice and perform only those tasks for which they have received the appropriate training. And no changes to the SLD or CLD profession were recommended by the SMEs. Next slide. The SMEs also suggested that the board could establish a pathway for registered optometric assistants to receive certification or licensure or registration. They would be registered. This would be a path towards certification or licensure. Several states use apprenticeship programs during which optometric assistants complete a set number of work hours during a specific time frame and take a test or multiple tests to then become certified or licensed. For example, several states use a certified para-optometric certification examination, which is a 100-item scored test developed by the Commission on Para-Optometric Certification. Next slide. So in conclusion, our study showed there is some confusion regarding optometric assistant scope of work. The SMEs, the optometric assistants, the CLDs, the SLDs, and optometrists could not agree on which tasks optometric assistants should and should not be performing, or a subset of those that they shouldn't. There was some agreement, obviously. Aside from those 25 tasks, there was agreement on the other tasks. We should make that clear. There could be health and safety risks to patients if some opticianry professionals do not have the necessary training to perform certain tasks. OPS recommends that the Board of Optometry create a task force or assign a committee to further evaluate these concerns. The task force or committee should decide if an additional license or registration needs to be added, and if so, establish a clear scope of work for optometric assistants. And OPS is happy to assist with these types of projects. We could do more research on what other states are doing, and we would certainly assist with clarifying the scope of work once we get more input from a committee. And next slide. Thank you. That's all we have, and we'll be happy to take questions. I know it's a lot of information.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you. That was a very, very well done presentation, very thorough. And thank you for all the work that your office has done the past several years on all of these projects for us. Do the members have any questions or comments about what was just received?
Hello, I'm one of the new members, Robert Kleppa. I had a couple questions. Again, very extensive study. Thank you for providing all the information. A couple questions. On the reviews that you received, you indicated there were various levels of education earned by various participants who responded, from on-the-job training all the way up to doctorate. Was the survey designed so that they would only provide their highest level of education in the field, such as they were using in this profession? Or let's say a doctor of philosophy is also working in this profession. I'm trying to figure out what the level of education meant to your survey.
Well, usually it says select your highest level. It usually-
Of any field.
Right.
Right, so you
Of
could-
what, there were boxes for them to check.
Right, so but you could be a doctorate of engineering, let's say, and be working as a contact lens person, and that's still their highest level of education, right? So it wasn't necessarily in the field in which they were working.
Correct.
Okay, so that was one. As far as the recommendations, so as far as if there is a subcommittee formed or if it's provided to a subcommittee, you indicated that your office would be willing to help, which is always appreciated. So your thoughts would be that you would conduct further testing or further evaluation and then provide that information to the subcommittee to help them better understand what the options are? Is that one of the things you were suggesting?
Well, we would suggest the subcommittee start with what we have provided. And then as things come up, we would assist with gathering information related to the focus, the direction that the subcommittee is going.
Okay, so they should pretty much start with what you already have given them and work from there. Okay, so your office does not feel that any further surveys or any further foundational information is required at this point. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, and then as far as what may come out of the subcommittee's work, that could be as high as licensure, or that could just be a certification because these are already registered individuals. Is that the idea?
You want me to?
What?
Yeah, no, these optometric assistants are unlicensed, unregistered, unknown individuals to the board.
So it's some level of connection to the board.
Yeah, so a registry, for example, would essentially make them known to us.
Okay.
Right? But would not necessarily, I mean, you can design registrations or registries in different ways. A registry or registration doesn't necessarily also authorize specific practice privileges, for example. It can simply just be a notification registry.
Alright.
That can also be very different, right? We have registered contact lens dispensers. They are, in that context, the registration is synonymous with a license.
Mhm.
Certification, it can also be designed in different ways. So all the way up to including full-blown licensure, right? So there's a spectrum, if you will. Right now, optometric assistants are completely unknowable to the board.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. That's all I had. Thank you.
I just had a little bit of clarification similar to Member Kleppa's assessment. So we have no way of knowing if the individuals with associate degrees or bachelor's degrees, say in a separate field like communications or arts, received their training for that profession on the job. Is that right? Then, okay.
Well, I believe the education and training, are they separate questions? Well, let us check for a minute.
While they're checking, just maybe inform part of that question. So under existing law, an optometric assistant can do certain functions, provided they have 45 hours of training. I think the statute says acceptable to the optometrist. We as the board don't know what that actually looks like. We don't technically know if that training happened. We don't technically know if that training was provided to the optometrist, acceptable to them or not. But that's what the law specifies is allowable. They can do certain subjective refraction procedures, provided they have that 45-hour training that's acceptable to the optometrist. So what that training is, what it looks like, the optometrist who's accepting it would be making that determination. So I don't know if that maybe answers part of your question.
They were asked to select all that apply. So they could have select on-the-job training in addition to a bachelor's degree, but we don't know what that bachelor's degree, what it was focused on.
Okay. You want to go first? Go down the road. Yeah.
Oh, this is Member Linden. Quick question for clarification. So if there is an optometric assistant and just say they're engaging in one of these tasks that, is recommended to fall under a licensure category, if there was some negligence or something like that involved from an enforcement perspective, what happens?
So we would investigate every complaint received. And if we got a complaint we were able to substantiate, for example, that an unlicensed person was performing services for which a license would be required, then we would pursue them under unlicensed activity provisions of law. But it would be pursuant to that type of process that we would find out about what is going on specifically or precisely because we don't know who these optometric assistants are in the first place, right? They're not licensed, they're not registered with us. So it would be pursuant to some sort of complaint or investigatory process that information would be learned, if you will.
I think the sample size for the OAs that responded, I think it was like, I think it said 33 or something like that. Do we know like a rough estimate of how big this population at large is? And also I was curious if one of the questions was whether the people that did respond, whether having licensure was a condition of employment or not.
So we don't know how big the population is because they're not required to register with the board. And what was your other question?
Whether any part of the questionnaire asked whether having some type of licensure was a condition of employment, like whether their employer required it or not.
We did not ask that question.
Okay, Member Garcia, I have a couple of questions. So our board, as we all know, is Consumer Protection. So do we have any historical data on how many complaints may have been submitted related to OAs, optometric assistants? Is that even an issue?
I don't know. We can check and look. I suspect probably not, right? It's probably not tracked in that way because they're not known to us. So I'll have to double check into that question further though.
Yeah, okay, I agree. I suspect it's probably very little or very few related specifically to OAs. Just a comment, we always kind of look to our dental profession and see what they're doing for best practices. And they have a similar model. They have dental assistants and we have optometric assistants that are not registered or certified. We have SLDs and CLDs and RDOs, and they have RDAs, RDHs for hygiene. So I think it's similar in that way. So I'm just wondering, is it even necessary to pursue certification or registration for OAs since they're not?
That's a good comparison. And there are unlicensed dental assistants. So everybody does that. There's DAs and then there's RDAs. The difference with the dental board is the scope of practice of what they can and can't do is very clear. What unlicensed unregistered DAs can do is clear. What RDAs can do is clear. The scope of practice for all of them is clear and I believe not overlapping, at least not for their primary duties. So here, what's different about your profession is you have a lot of overlap. which is confusing. You know, is it a serious public health issue? That's for you to determine. But it is confusing for regulatory purposes. It's confusing for the public. I understand there's issues with hiring, is that there's not enough assistance of all kinds. And so I assume there's confusion in the workplace about, you know, pay and equity and those kinds of things. And I know there's work shortages. So those are things for you to decide.
So just for the board, this was a discussion item. I don't think there's not any action contemplated on this item for today. But I think we should continue to talk about it. I think we have an opportunity here, as OPES has suggested, for there to be some further study. I think among our existing committees, we were talking about earlier, the Telehealth Committee might have a sort of natural home for this. Maybe we need to rename that committee to account for it. But a lot of what the optometric assistants are doing does involve telehealth, and the statute already specifically talks about some of that. So that might be one idea for us to consider down the road as we're continuing to engage in this, about sending it to our Telehealth Committee for further study and analysis. Just maybe one or two other comments on that, especially for our new board members. We are, I believe still today, the only board in America that is combined. We are the Board of Optometry, but we also include opticians. All the other boards or regulatory schemes around the country that regulate opticians do so separately from optometry. So we are a little bit unique in that respect. And again, as I mentioned, there is some natural overlap with telehealth here. So that might be something for us to consider. I'd be happy to bring this back at the next or future board meeting. So those would be kind of my thoughts on it. I don't know if members, President Wong, if you had other thoughts on this topic.
No, I think further discussion is warranted. So thanks. Any other comments from our board members? Thank you for everyone's participation in our discussion. It looks like we have one person for public comment in our audience. Oh, so thank you to the two of you. It was a wonderful, wonderful report.
Thank you very much.
And now I'm asking for public comment from the audience in the room. Looks like I have Christine Schultz from COA who's coming forward.
There I am. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Christine Schultz, Executive Director for the California Optometric Association. Welcome to our new board members. It's great to work with you. Looking forward to that. I just wanted to express some concerns about removing tasks from the optometric assistant task list. You know, it's really hard to find an optometric assistant, to find staff right now, and to require a certification or remove tasks just doesn't make any sense from our perspective. The things that were chosen didn't seem to impact public safety from our perspective, many of the things there. And, you know, I think that requiring a certification would create unnecessary barriers to entry into the profession. And that would harm a lot of people, not just optometrists looking for staff, but those staff looking for jobs as well. So we'll be happy to participate in any staff level work or any committee work. We'd be pleased to be on a member of that committee or provide input as appropriate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine.
Next up, it looks we have Ruby Garcia.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for the completion of this report. It started in 2017, and it was initiated by the dispensing committee of opticians, and it would be great if we can have that voice again. I agree with Ms. Schultz that further discussion, I think, is needed. As you can see, we saw that there was a lot of confusion about scope of practice because SLDs, CLDs are required to be licensed. They are overseen by the board, but The optometric system is doing the same scope, they have the same scope of practice, but they're not overseen. So we're looking at that. I wanted to also express some excitement about education. There is already an existing statewide apprenticeship program that will always be free. There will never be a charge for anyone to participate or to enroll in those programs. Currently, we have Sac City, who does have a 2-year degree program. They just launched it. And we have 2 optometrists who taught at Berkeley University, who are in the process of opening up 2-year degree programs. And we are working on a bachelor's degree with the emphasis of opticianry. So those educational sources will be coming in the future. But thank you so much. And I do encourage that we have further discussion about what we reviewed in these reports.
Thank you, Ruby.
Are there any other public comments from people in the room? Nope. Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones for public comment, please.
Certainly. We've opened up the WebEx Q&A option in order to facilitate public comment. If anyone would like to make a comment on the report, you can look for the question mark icon, click on that, type the word comment and click send. You may click on the hand icon to raise your hand, and our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. Are there any comments on the OPA's presentation? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We are now going to move on to item number 6, which is our executive officer report.
All right. Thank you, President Wong. And just real quick for the members, I think we have lunch pickup scheduled at 12:30. So we're going to try to get through item 6. Staff will go pick up lunch, and then we'll come back and try to take our lunch break at around 12:30-ish. So this is agenda item 6A, the executive officer's report. I'm going to start with the program update. In your materials, you can find the substantive information that I'll be discussing. But first, just want to give a brief staffing update that our receptionist has recently promoted to a position at another state agency, and we are in the process of filling that position. Applications have recently closed, and we're beginning that review process. So hoping to have the board's receptionist position filled soon. Similarly, as some of the returning board members know, our lead enforcement analyst retired at the end of May. So we are also recruiting for that position. Similarly, that posting has closed, and we are in the process of reviewing the application. So looking forward to bringing a new enforcement analyst on board soon. In the spirit of continual staffing changes, we also lost our assigned legal counsel to another state agency following the last meeting in May. And so we are delighted to have joined with us today our new legal counsel, Anthony Payne, who was assigned to us in mid-July and has hit the ground not just with a run, but with a sprint. So thank you very much to you, Anthony, for being here and helping us out. A copy of the current organizational chart is included as an attachment at the end of this memo. And for the new members, this is where you can visualize where we have our existing vacancies. So happy to answer any questions about what you see there at this time, if there are any. You will see that there are several vacancies on the main units that we are organized in, which are enforcement and licensing. As I mentioned, we are recruiting for the vacant OT office tech position on the admin unit. We are also recruiting for a associate governmental program analyst position on the enforcement unit. There are no current plans for recruitment on the other vacant positions at this time. Any questions about the org chart or item 6A so far? Okay. Next, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in detail when we get to the licensing statistics, but we want to talk just briefly about the sort of recently concluded, if you will, optometrist new graduate season. So historically, or at least for the last several years, we've had some challenges in terms of the timeliness of approving applications for licensure for optometrists, specifically for new graduates. So for just brief education for our new members around the country, optometry schools have their graduation starting in early May. And it's a very busy time in the months prior to that, and certainly in the month or two after that. So pretty much from December until graduation season, the board is receiving materials sort of endlessly in terms of transcripts, exam scores, fingerprint background, forms, live scan forms, passport photos, other documents such as letters of verification from other states that the individual might be licensed in. We're receiving hundreds of documents during that time period. And then, as I mentioned, in early May, optometry students begin graduating, and they are very eager to get licensed. We were seeing applications from some folks on the exact day that they walked across the graduation stage. And as I mentioned, historically we've not done a very quick job in terms of processing those applications. So, for example, last year, measured from the beginning of May, we had not issued our 100th new graduate license until the end of August. It was taking about 80 to 90 days for a processing time. This most recently concluded graduation season, we have reduced that timeline down to under 1 week. So we've had a massive improvement in our processing time for new graduates of optometry licenses, and we were able to issue 140 of those licenses by July 1st. So a massive improvement, and a big shout out that I want to give just to the staff for working on this. How we were able to do this was all about organization at our intake level. As I mentioned, we're receiving hundreds of documents, both physically in the emails, and they all need to be organized and stored in such a way that we're able to process them. And so that's what we spent a lot of time early this year doing, was trying to come up with a system that would assist us in that regard. And we put in place a system that has shown some very, very positive results. So very proud of the staff and the team on the work that they were able to do processing these applications for new licensure. We heard a little bit earlier from the representative from DCA about some Bagley-King changes, and I just wanted to highlight a few of them, especially for our new board members. Pursuant to a lot of the COVID changes that happened related to Bagley-King, we were able to meet in a virtual environment. We have been meeting hybrid, meaning we have always had a physical location for board members here in Sacramento to come to, but most of our members were participating in the meetings virtually. Because those provisions that allowed for that flexibility were only in effect till July 1 and were not extended, the flexibility that we had there has been reduced. And so for this meeting, we are all here physically today, and would anticipate that we'll be meeting in this way going forward until such time as the law might change to provide that flexibility. So just wanted to explain for the new board members what we have been doing and what we will likely do going forward. And then the final item for 6A is just some outreach and committee updates. Don't need to go through the list and read it, but if there's any questions about any of the items here, I'd be happy to answer them. Just giving some information to the board members and the public about some recent outreach activities that we've been engaged in, as well as some future ones that we're working on. So we have a couple events in September and October to speak to both graduates of optician programs and students in optometry school. We're going to be talking with them about, some tips and tricks that they can employ to assist them during the licensure process to make it as smooth as possible for everybody. And then maybe just one item to highlight that we were able to receive a really good presentation for both myself and staff from a former board member, David Turetsky, who came in and gave the team a presentation on eye conditions and different examination procedures. So I thought that was really helpful that we were able to do over the summer. Finally, just in terms of outreach, our summer edition of the Spectacle, which is our newsletter, we're expected to release that in September. We're going to be focusing on 2 of our new board members. Member Sue will get you in the fall or winter newsletter. So we'll have some information on Member Bragg and Member Kleppa in this summer edition. Some information on advertising laws and telehealth, and then we're also going to celebrate and mention the centennial for UC Berkeley's Herbert Wortham School of Optometry and Vision Science. So look for that to come out here in the next few weeks. Are there any questions about item 6A?
I have one question. I just can't help myself. It says California Optometric Association New OD Boot Camp. And I'm imagining a lot of calisthenics and running. Is that what was involved here or something a little bit more?
How many jumping jacks did we do that day, Christine? Yeah, no, say a little bit about that. I appreciate that, Member Kleppa. This is something that the California Optometric Association puts on. It's their program. I think it's I'm kind of faking it here, Christine. I don't know everything that you do, so sorry to bring you guys up here, but I think this is a series of events. It's not a one-off that they have. And I was lucky enough to be invited. It was a virtual event, participated with Christine, a lot of new grads, right? And so they're asking a lot of questions about, how do I get licensed? Where do I send my transcript? What happens if I have this issue? What am I allowed to do between graduation and receiving my license? And so it was really a Q&A type of forum. I had to do a lot of push-ups and air squats to get ready for it, though.
I don't think I have anything to add. You did a good job of describing. It was just a series for new graduates to help them through the practice.
All right, so it sounded like it was more of an academic focus, right? How to get into the profession
Yeah.
and then how to get up to speed quickly, that kind of thing. Right, thank you.
Any comments from anyone else on the new members? I personally just wanted to give a shout out to licensing. I was amazed at how quickly we got licensees licensed this year. And I will tell you that I got numerous emails from Berkeley grads saying, I just looked on the website and there's a number next to my name. What does that mean? And I'm like, congratulations, you are licensed. So they were definitely expecting a 2 to 3 month period wait. And so many of them were licensed within a week. I think the record was 1 day for one of them. So kudos.
And if I have an opportunity, I'd love to just second that. I cannot tell you how much of a difference it has made in the lives of our students. Last year I knew of 3 people who lost at least 2 jobs because of the time lapse of getting a license. And this year people have been just so excited, and it was just the tremendous work of this board. We thank you so, so much for the change. We appreciate it.
Thank you. We will just keep going. We'll go to item 6B. I'm going to take this one for Jolie today, since she's making our lunch run for us. So thank you, Jolie. As I just mentioned also in the item 6A about our lead enforcement analyst, so that posting just closed earlier this month, and we look forward to introducing that new team member at our next meeting in December. We are, as part of that process, changing some of the duties in that position. That position prior to the departure was known as the lead enforcement analyst, which was a carryover, if you will, from a time prior to us having an enforcement manager. And we got an enforcement manager position, Jolie Walker's position, last summer, around about a year ago, actually. So when a position vacates, you have an opportunity to make a couple changes. And so one of the changes that we're making is removing some of the duties from that position, such as probation monitoring, and moving that over to another team member on our staff currently who has a lot of experience with the probation side of enforcement. So there will be a little bit of changes to that existing position. They will be picking up more of the more difficult consumer complaints that we deal with. As part of this item, there are 3 statistical items to call your attention to, which you can see here in the materials. So if you flip to the statistics, what we have put together for you, especially for the new members, are the complaint prioritization and referral guidelines. So here at DCA, we have categories that complaints essentially get placed into, and certain categories mean certain things, right? So there's categories 1 and 2, which are the more urgent, high priority cases. The chart here gives you a breakdown and a listing of examples of these types of allegations, acts of serious patient or consumer harm, such as injury or death, for example, sexual misconduct with a patient. These type of complaints get put into an urgent category, and we refer them out to the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation, D of I. And D of I is the investigators' sworn law enforcement arm of the department, and they investigate these more complex cases for us. So wanted to show for the new members this case complaint prioritization and referral guidelines chart, because when you look at the actual statistics, the very first numbers that you see are the complexity, urgent, high, routine, which again match up with the categories that I just discussed. So what you have presented here in the enforcement statistics are the full fiscal year. As by way of reminder, our fiscal year is July 1 to June 30. So we just concluded fiscal year 22-23. We report out full quarter numbers. So you will not see Q1 of the current fiscal year that we are in until the December meeting. Q1 is July to September. So we're still right in the middle of the existing quarter. There was nothing particular, there's nothing specific that I wanted to necessarily call out on the statistics. I did want to just make mention that you will see we've been much more active in citations, especially on, both sides. The statistics are broken out by optometry program and then opticianry program. And you'll see a sizable increase in citations issued this most recently concluded fiscal year 22-23 compared to the prior fiscal year 21-22. So we're being active in investigating our complaints and pursuing public protection. Any questions about the overall optometry or opticianry fiscal year 22-23 statistics? The final statistical item as part of this is the continuing education audit report. Again, just by way of brief background for the new members, continuing education audits are not mandated that they be done, but we do them. And the reason why we do them, even though there's no mandate, is because the legislature has determined that the way that we ensure minimal competency is by having a continuing education requirement. And for many years, or at least a year or two, we were not really performing CE audits. When we did, it was a little sporadic, and there wasn't a lot of consistency to it. In fact, in fiscal year 21-22, we did not perform a single CE audit. We were faulted as a board coming out of our last sunset review by the legislature for our efforts and work in this area, continuing education. The limited data that we had suggested, in terms of audits that we had performed, suggested that maybe there was a high, failure rate. And the legislature wanted us to be more active in this area. Following sunset review, we sought legislative resources via a budget change proposal to get positions and resources to do this work. We secured those positions, and as part of that, we said that we would begin reporting out CE audit statistics at board meetings. So I'm forgetting now, but I think the May meeting may have been the first time that we began reporting these CE audit numbers, and so this would be our second meeting doing so. So just wanted to give that background for the new members. You will see we are trying to ramp up our CE audit numbers. Right now, we are selecting about 5%. We would love to increase that goal to a 10% goal. What you do see here is that we performed 72, I think it is, if I'm reading right, in the fiscal year. And we had an 86% pass rate. So I believe the data from the prior sunset review suggested a failure rate of around a third, which the legislature, even though the data was limited, suggested was probably something to be looked at and potentially concerning. So, I don't think, in my estimation, I would say that we have a lot of robust data yet, right? We have just begun doing CE audits just this past fiscal year, and we're trying to spend the time to ramp that up. So we will build more data in the quarters to come and hopefully inform this question about the success failure of our CE. Right now, we're showing about an 86% pass rate. Are there any questions on the optometry, opticianry enforcement statistics or the CE statistics?
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. Basically just having to do with the average amount of time for an investigation of a citation.
Okay.
I'm seeing numbers of somewhere between 2 and 3 years for investigation, if I'm reading this correctly. Average days to close under, I guess, the optometry program, 1,022, down 91%, which is good. And now it says year to date 91. So am I seeing that's a prior average and the current average is far fewer? Am I misreading that?
I'm trying to find exactly where you are. Are you?
Sure. It's the section, it's under the heading. The first page of this series is Statistics Report Optometry Program. And we go on to the second page of that report under citations.
Yep.
And then it says final citation, average data closed. You with me?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I want to understand this a little bit more. Currently under that program, what is the average number of days to close an investigation of a citation?
I cannot tell you currently because I don't know as of right now today.
Okay.
But as of the concluded fiscal year, July 1, it was 91 days.
Okay, good. Now, if we switch over to the other program,
Yep.
It's still hard for me to pronounce this. Opticianry?
Opticianry.
Opticianry, I'll get there. Okay, opticianry. Under that report, citations average days to close is now 852?
Yes.
Okay. That is a significant difference between
Correct.
the two programs. Can you elaborate as to why it's so much longer in that program than the other program?
Not here today, no.
Okay.
I don't have enough information to adequately inform my response, so we'll have to look into that. A couple preliminary thoughts, however, would be that, remember, this was a program we inherited, so we could have inherited some legacy complaints that could have impacted those times. The two programs are also very different.
Okay.
And so there could be unique complexities within those differences, but we can make a note of that and come back at the next meeting with some more detailed info.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. And the last question I would have is what your goals would be for closing these citations. In other words, it's 91 days for the optometry program meeting your internal metrics or what you're trying to achieve?
I do not have the goal timeframes in front of me. I believe we are meeting them on the optometry side. I do not think that the 852-day would be meeting the goals on the opticianry side.
All right, so maybe we can put that off for the next meeting, but I would love to get more information on that if we can get it.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from members on this item? Still have 6C. Okay. If there's no further questions on item 6B, then we will move on to agenda item 6C, which is the Executive Officer's Report, Examination and Licensing Programs. And I believe Randy Love is going to speak to us on this one. Randy is the Administration and Licensing Manager for the board. Hi, Randy.
Hello. All right, so we already got the lead of the story for the examination and licensing programs. We had a stellar graduation season for this year for our optometrists. Other news that we have, we make constant adjustments to our Breeze program. Those of you who've been here a while know that's our database that our licensees can log into to submit applications, make adjustments to their license. It's also what we use to approve those applications and move everything forward. So we're constantly making adjustments to make them more clear, make things more efficient. Things that have happened recently, our optometrists can now apply for an immunization certificate from their Breeze account dashboard. You no longer have to send in a paper application and a check. We're also working on, we made some adjustments to the fictitious name permit application to make it a little bit more clear. And so we are getting everything we need with the application instead of having to reach out to applicants after the fact and gain that additional information. So we've been able to significantly reduce the amount of time it takes to approve a fictitious name permit. Other things that are going to be coming soon, you will be able to order a letter of verification from your Breeze account dashboard, no matter what type of license or certificate you have. Currently, you have to mail in a request and a check in order to get a letter of verification. And we will also be able to apply for retired optometrist or retired volunteer optometrist status from your Breeze account dashboard. Again, no longer having to send in a paper application and check. Those things should be effective in October. And then the last thing on our examination and licensing report is our statistical review. You will definitely see in fiscal year 22-23 that we have licensed 2 graduating classes in one fiscal year, especially if you compare it to the fiscal year prior. Another thing that we're going to see in the future is that our odd year renewals will be a slightly different number of people than our even year renewals because we've licensed so many people this year. Other things that you can look at are the total number of licensees by license type and status, and then graphs that show the average processing time for our various application types. And that is all the information I had, unless you have questions.
Thank you, Randy. Maybe I might opine just on a couple of things, especially for the new members. The FNPs that Randy was just mentioning, these are fictitious name permits. If you want to incorporate yourself and open up a business to provide optometry services with a fake name, then you need a fictitious name permit. And we get about 150 or so of these a year. And prior to this change that Randy was just mentioning, all of these applications could be submitted without including all of the documents necessary for us to actually review it. We don't have any statutory requirement that a licensee or applicant provide an email address. And so we don't often have an easy way to notify somebody of a very simple deficiency. And so our process therefore would have required us to draft a letter, mail it, send it out, hope it would come back. And now we've just lost weeks of time. So we explored earlier this year some changes to that process, and happy to report that they have been implemented, and it has made the FNP application process much smoother for both staff and for the applicant. So that's one huge change that I just wanted to call out. And then, as Randy was just sort of alluding to, and as I was mentioning in my item 6A regarding the processing time improvements that we made, our numbers are going to look a little funky, right, for a little while, because we don't have a precedent of doing 140 people in the same fiscal year that we received them in. And so you can see actually on item 6CI attachment A, the very top where it says optometrist license and optometrist renewal, optometrist exam, you can see what we received and what we approved. So we received 259 applications. We approved 417. So our numbers are going to look a little weird for a little while. As Randy mentioned, since we're biennial renewal, right, half of our ODs renew 1 year, the other half renew the other year. And so we're going to see some little funky numbers, if you will, on the renewal side. But it's a good story to tell, right? Well, how did you approve so many more people than you received? Well, because we did it quicker, right? So it's a good story to tell, but it just makes the numbers look a little weird for a little while. So just wanted to call that out. And then attachment 6C, especially for the new members, this, I believe we've now been displaying this this is our second, I think, meeting in a row, third maybe the March one. What you see here with the graphics on attachment 6C, item 6CI, are breakdowns of volume and processing times for all of our license types. And so what you see here is you see a line which shows you the processing time, and then you see a bar chart which shows you the volume. And you can visualize what we're talking about with respect to the optometrist initial licensure by looking at that second graphic. And you see last year, August, September 2022 was when we licensed the overwhelming majority of all of those new grads from 2022. What you see from May and June of 2023 is that 140 that I've been talking about. So, and you can see also that line just start to plummet down to zero, that processing time. And similarly, as I was mentioning earlier about sort of the trajectory, right, or the flow of how applications and licensure for optometrists goes, they all start graduating in May for the most part. So it's the months prior to May that we're getting a lot of the exam requests. You have to take the California State exam which is the Part 1 process. And that very first graphic that you see, which says optometrist exam request, shows you that volume, right? You see January, February, March, April have the bigger volume for the exam requests, because they're trying to take that state exam right before they graduate. And then once they graduate, they're able to open Part 2. So I just thought we'd call out a few of the highlights here on our work with applications and licensure. Similarly with FNPs, fictitious name permits, you'll see a lot of volume. We had a little bit of a backlog in that application type last November, December, and that number has come all the way down. You see a lot of volume in December, November, January, February, March on FNPs. And similarly, the processing time come way down. So for the new members, this graphical information, you'll expect to see this at every board meeting. Obviously, this is full year data since we just concluded the fiscal year. At the December meeting, you'll be seeing Q1 data for this quarter 1 of the current fiscal year. Any questions for Randy or myself on the exam and licensing statistics?
And Member Garcia, no question, just a great job to Randy and the team. You made a huge difference in a small amount of time. Thank you.
I also would like to join Member Garcia in congratulating you on reducing the backlog. Quite impressive. I did have a question about one of the things we received, this agenda item 6CI, license applications by type, that first document.
Sure.
The first reference is to optometrist exam, and it says received approved. Is that the number of responses to the exam questions that was received from an applicant?
No. So this is so the optometrist licensure in California is 2 parts. Part 1 is that you take and pass the California Law and Regulations exam. So what you see here for optometrist exam received is how many people applied to take that Part 1 exam, and then how many people, I believe Randy, is passed it. Approved here actually means pass.
Okay, so 48 passed it out of 54 who applied.
Oh, you're looking at quarter 1.
Yes, I'm looking at just the beginning.
Sorry, yeah, yeah, okay.
We can go whichever column best explains it. I'll go to that column, but I just wanted to know, do we have any way to figure out what the passage rate is for the exam?
Let me actually back up, Member Kleppa, I misspoke. Approved does not mean pass. Approved means how many we processed. The pass rate for CLRE will be reported separately via DCA in the annual report. That report is not yet completed. I don't have that pass number in front of me, but to be clear, what you see here are how many people applied and how many people we approved to take the exam.
Okay, so they met all the preliminary requirements necessary to take the exam and therefore have it count if they pass. Is that the idea?
Can you say the last part of that? Having a
Sure,
count?
that they had completed all the foundational requirements to have it essentially matter. They completed school, they had enough years of whatever they had to do so that taking this exam would actually be useful to them and eventually becoming licensed in the state.
The only requirement to take the CLRE is that you be 18 and you be willing to pay $279.
So those are those 2 mandatory things that they have to pass, right? All right.
Correct.
Fair enough. Do we have any estimate of what the annual passage rate is for the exam?
The CLRE?
Yeah.
Yes, as I was just mentioning, we are working on that for a separate report for DCA called the DCA Annual Report.
Okay.
We don't yet have a final report to offer or provide, and I don't have that number in front of me, but I would anticipate at the December meeting, we'll know that information.
All right, fair enough. I was just curious, on average, how many people pass? I would appreciate learning that if you can tell me. Thank you.
Absolutely.
This is Member Linden. I just want to also say once again, thank you to everyone for all your hard work. Just looking at the numbers, it really is such a difference. So really, you guys have been doing a great job. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that. And staff, most staff are listening. And for those that aren't, we'll make sure we pass on the positive comments. Thank you. Thanks, Randy. Got one item left on the executive officer's report, and then I think we'll be ready to break for lunch. This is item 6D. This is the regulatory update. There is no action on this item. This is just a regulatory update. What you have here, members and members of the public, are the board-approved regulatory packages. Just by way of brief background, staff brings a proposal to the board regarding regulation changes or regulations that we want to see be made, and the board has to decide via a motion to initiate that process. So what you have here are, I believe, 8 board-approved regulatory packages in various stages of progress. And so we're going to just give you the updates on these items. The first item is the mobile optometric office regulations. This is a permit program that the board was supposed to have implemented at the beginning of this year. There was also an implementation date for the year prior. The board has not met either of these implementation dates. The update that we have on this package for this meeting is that we have submitted the package as a draft to the Department of Consumer Affairs Legal Office. So we have not just commenced work on it, we are working on it, and we are getting that package moving forward. So as I just mentioned, it is currently with legal. Don't have an estimated time period in terms of when we would be submitting it formally to the Office of Administrative Law at this point, but anticipate a further update on this item at the December meeting. The second item is the optometry continuing education regulations. This rulemaking package was noticed on April 14th of this year by OAL, Office of Administrative Law, and the 45-day public comment period ended on May 31st of this year. The board received no substantive comments on the package, and we are moving forward toward finalizing the regulations. The package is with OAL, and a formal decision is actually expected today. I anticipate and I'm certainly hopeful of a positive decision, and we would look forward to these regulations becoming effective at some point later this year. The third item is implementation of AB 458. 458 is the Home Residence Permit Program. This is also a regulatory package that the board has not started staff work on yet. We're doing research, but we haven't formalized an actual draft and submitted it to legal yet at this time, but we are working on that one as well. The optometry disciplinary guidelines, again, are board approved, but staff has not commenced work on moving that package forward yet. The optician program omnibus regulatory changes are in the same status as the optometry disciplinary guidelines, although I will also mention that this package is, although it's on here because it's board approved, it's going to have to be brought back to the board for a new board approval, because as you see, some of the subject or one of the subjects of this item involves aligning current fees with statute. And I'm going to mention in a few moments item 8 on this agenda item, which involves fees, which we've already taken care of on item 8, what is anticipated to be included in item 5. So the board approved item 5 optician program omnibus regulatory changes will have to change and come back to the board. Number 6, dispensing optician disciplinary guidelines. This package is being worked on by staff, and we anticipate submitting it to the Legal Affairs Office of DCA in the fall of this year, so prior to the December board meeting. You'll notice there are 2 disciplinary guideline packages that I just mentioned, one for optometry, one for opticianry, dispensing opticians. The optometry ones, as I mentioned a few moments ago, which we are not currently working on, there are disciplinary guidelines in place. They are dated from 2012. They are outdated, which is why we need to update them, but we do have guidelines. We do not have any disciplinary guidelines on the optician side. We never have. We didn't have any when they were brought over to our program. And so we need to get going on that package. So we have been working on that one. And as I just mentioned, anticipate submitting it to DCA later this fall. Number 7, requirements for glaucoma certification. This package also has not been started by staff. And I would say similarly to the comments I just made on item 5, we probably need to bring this back to the board to take a look at and do some further study and research, since it's been some time since this was board approved. The last one is fees. And as we've talked a little bit about already in this meeting, the board approved at the May 12th public meeting, directed staff, approved this proposal and directed staff via a motion to initiate the rulemaking process, which we did. And this package was submitted to DCA, has made it out of DCA, and is currently with our control agency, the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Would anticipate hearing from them on this package shortly. And barring any substantive edits or anything like that, we will continue moving this package forward, anticipating to have it implemented by July 1st of 2024. That is the regulatory update for agenda item 6D. Happy to take any questions or comments from the members.
This is Member Linden. I just want to say thank you very much for the update and having all this information presented in this way, with when it was approved by the board, where it is. It's very useful and helpful. And I see that there has been so much progress made on all of these reg packages that have been kind of floating out there. So thank you again to you and staff for doing this.
Thank you, Member Linden. Appreciate that.
Any other comments from board members? I'm going to go ahead and open it up for public comment from people in the room. And we do not have any public comment from the room. Madam Moderator, if you could open it up, public comment for phone.
Certainly. If anyone would like to make a comment on the executive officer's report, you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, or you may click on the question mark icon, type the word comment into the text box and click send. And our call-in users may press *3 to raise their hand. We do have a request for comment from Paul Reimers. Paul, I'll send you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 2 minutes with a 30-second warning. You're unmuted.
Right. Yeah, hello. Thank you. Yeah, I've been waiting for this section to come up. I was going to ask on behalf of a retired volunteered optometrist if there's possibility of, since we're so limited in our scope of, practice, if it would also be possible to reduce the CE requirements, instead of from 50, maybe down to 30 or 35, be more, basically what I'm doing is diabetic screening for a free clinic. And so, if that could be a consideration or something for the board to continue to consider for the reasons I mentioned. So that's basically my question or my request.
Yeah, this is the Executive Officer, Greg Pruden. And Paul, I apologize. I know you had made a comment earlier, and I intended to try to weave some information into the update that I was just giving on regulations, including CE. We appreciate your comment, and I think staff and the board will continue to look at that. We have a lot of conversations about CE at our Practice and Education Committee, most principally. I don't think this is something that we currently have on the table, but I think we'll certainly continue to look at it, and we appreciate your comment and any other information that you might have on it. I will say, I think that the reason why the requirement is the same, even for people who are retired volunteer, is because a retired volunteer still has an active current license that enables them to practice. Although it is in a limited way, and it's for unpaid volunteer services, and the settings are more specific. I think that's probably that was the intent or the reason why the law didn't make a distinction between the two. But appreciate your comment, and we'll continue to engage and research it. This was not a topic that was involved in the CE regulatory proposal that the board had approved and is currently engaged in. So I hope that's helpful, but we'll continue to look at it. And again, I think the Practice and Education Committee of the board, which looks at our continuing education and reviews and approves that, would be the better place for the board to have that conversation.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Greg. I appreciate it. And we'll
certainly.
So what would be the next place to bring it up, or will it go and transfer to that?
Well, I think our next practice, I don't have my calendar right in front of me, but our next Practice and Education Committee meeting, I believe, is in October. It's publicly available on our website. I just don't have it right in front of me. I apologize, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the consideration.
And this is the moderator. I do not see any other requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think now it's 12:49 and we are done with item number 8. I'm sorry, item number 6. So we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. When do we want to? Okay, and we'll reconvene in 1 hour, so it's 12:49, so 1:50. We will reconvene for the remaining part of our the afternoon. It is 1:50. Welcome back, everybody, from lunch. And let's go ahead and, I think we have to have a roll call, right? Secretary Linden, if you would do a roll call.
Okay, Dr. Bragg,
Present.
Member Kleppa,
Here.
Member Linden is here, Member Sue,
Present.
Dr. Garcia,
Present.
and Dr. Wong.
Present.
So we have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item number 8. 7. I can't get it anymore. 7, discussion and possible action of legislation.
Thank you, President Wong. Gregory Pruden, Executive Officer, agenda item number 7, discussion and possible action on legislation. At the May 12th, 2023 board meeting, which was our last meeting, positions were taken on several bills before the board. For discussion and possible action, we have several of these bills on our agenda today, and we're going to give some updates on them. Several of these bills, just to preface, while this is an open discussion and possible action item meeting, we can have discussion and possibly act on all of these items. Several of these items have not changed or have not changed substantively since the board's prior action in May, and I'll be clear about which ones those are. The first bill we have is Assembly Bill 1028 by McKinner, reporting of crimes mandated reporters. The board position on this bill taken at the May meeting was oppose unless amended to mandate reporting to either law enforcement or other social services that are available. The board's concern was about the change in the mandate. So just give the brief board position and then I'll get into the bill. The reason for the bill, according to the author, is to ensure survivors can access healthcare services by creating a survivor-centered trauma-informed approach and limit non-consensual and potentially dangerous referrals to law enforcement. That's just the author's summary in a nutshell. The description of the current legislation, this bill would on and after January 1st, 2025, so there's a little bit of delayed implementation in the bill, would limit a health practitioner's duty to make a report of injuries to law enforcement to those instances where the injury is by firearm, either self-inflicted, where the wound or physical injury was the result of child abuse, or where the wound or physical injury was the result of elder abuse. The bill would require a healthcare practitioner, of which optometrists are part of that definition, who in their professional capacity or within the scope of their employment knows or reasonably suspects that the patient is experiencing any form of domestic violence or sexual violence to provide brief counseling and offer a referral to a domestic violence or sexual violence advocacy services organization. Excuse me. This is the substantive change in this bill. Prior or existing law mandates that domestic and sexual violence be reported to law enforcement. So this bill would not mandate reports in those instances. The amendments that occurred on June 27th and June 28th and are now reflected in the current version of the bill may not fully address the board's concerns, because again, the board was concerned about mandating of reporting. But I do want to point out that the amendments bring into the bill mandatory reporting for cases of child or elder abuse, which is an important consumer protection measure. Additionally, practitioners of the health facility would be required to report cases of domestic or sexual violence to social services organizations. And important to remember that notwithstanding the fact that the bill would make these reporting in certain instances not a mandate, there is nothing that would prevent a practitioner from reporting cases of domestic or sexual violence to law enforcement if they believed that they needed to do so to limit a serious or imminent threat to the public. So the summary that I have for the board is, again, the board position was oppose unless amended. Board wanted to see a mandate. The recent amendments to the bill may not fully address those concerns, but by bringing in child abuse and elder abuse, that is an important consumer protection measure. So action requested for the board is to discuss and possibly revise the position after considering whether the recent amendments address the board's concerns or not.
Member Garcia, Greg, I have a question. So the amendment for children and elders, was that it's still not mandated to report?
No, that would be mandated.
It is mandated to report to what authorities?
Law enforcement.
It is. Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions for Greg, for Mr. Pruden?
I just comment. So the last time we discussed this, I was opposed to it. I felt removing the mandate was a negative change, and it really doesn't protect the consumer and doesn't protect our patients if we eliminated the mandate. So now that I see, at least partially, is mandated that for child evidence of child abuse or elder abuse is a mandate, still a mandated reporting event, then I would be okay in supporting it that way.
Do we need public comment? You want to do everything and then do public comment?
Council, on these items, because there's discussion and possible action for each individual item, we should take public comment. Is that correct?
So for each item, if they're right before there's action being taken, yes, there should be public comment. But if there is no action that's going to be taken, one just needs to be needed for the agenda item.
Well, I think in this case, Member Garcia has indicated he's open to it, but we don't have any motion or anything like that on the tables. So looks like Member Linden might have
I have a
something
question,
to say. Yeah.
just to clarify, because I know this was discussed at the last board meeting, which I wasn't a part of, but where does the board stand? Like in terms of, has the board taken a formal position that has, been, introduced or to?
Our formal position was oppose unless amended.
Okay.
We wanted essentially to see the mandate come back. We kind of wanted to see the opposite of when we took this position, right? Back in May, the amendments happened after. But when we took the position in May, we were not comfortable with the change in the mandate, and we wanted to see the mandate for essentially come back.
Okay.
And with these amendments, it hasn't fully come back, but they've brought back some important considerations, child and elder abuse.
And just to clarify, in terms of the board potentially taking action, the options would be to just have it be support or oppose or no position at all?
Yeah, I think at this point, given this is important, I probably should have prefaced this for everybody. Where we are currently in the legislative calendar, there's no real room for amendments. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Member Linden. The legislative business is all but done essentially for the year where we are in the calendar. So our ability to ask for any further amendments on this bill or any other bill is going to be very, very toothless, if you will.
Okay.
So yeah, I think if the amendments have not met our concern, right? The current version of the bill with the inclusion of child and elder abuse being now mandated, if that doesn't meet our concern as a board or overcome the concern that we have, then we would probably want to move our position to oppose. If it does, then we would either want to go to neutral or support.
Okay, but we still have the option of going neutral.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other comments from members?
Actually, I do have one question, Member Klappa here. If the board develops or asserts a neutral position, that means that all of the mandates that remain in force, depending on whether this bill goes forward or not, but our position is basically that all the mandates remain in force, correct? All the reporting in current law would remain in force. Is that right?
We'd be taking a position on the bill as proposed. And so the difference between a neutral and a support can be subtle, right? It can be strategic in terms of why you take one position over another. Support is usually a little bit more fully throated, right? In terms of how you feel about it. Neutral could could be used in instances where, in this specific case, maybe the amendments address some of our concern, but we wish it would have gone even further. And so maybe we don't want to support it for that reason. But a neutral would be where we land. But you're not taking a position on the law as it exists today. You're taking a position on the proposed bill that would change the law.
Exactly. No, I thought I understood what you were saying, and it seems right to me. So if the board took a neutral position, we're obviously not voting one way or the other, but we're not supporting it, we're not against it. We're basically just saying things are as they need to be as far as we're concerned, and we're not going to deal with this.
Yeah, neutral is kind of like I'm fine with it.
Sounds
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
Any other comments from members? Can I get a motion?
My motion would be that the board adopts the position of neutrality, that the current mandate is appropriate, but that given the changes, it is not such an improper bill as to be opposed, yet not sufficient to be supported. That would be my motion.
Member Garcia, I second that motion.
So can I get, I will take public comment from the room. Does not look like we have any public comment in the room. Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phone for public comment, please.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand icon. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and it appears there are no requests for public comment.
Okay, thank you. If we could go ahead and have a roll call vote.
Okay.
Secretary Linden?
So the motion was made by Kleppa to adopt a neutral position, seconded by Dr. Garcia. Dr. Bragg?
Aye.
Member Kleppa?
Aye.
Member Linden? Aye. Sorry. Member Sue?
Aye.
Dr. Garcia?
I vote aye.
And Dr. Wong?
I vote aye.
Okay, so the measure passes.
Very good. We will move on to the next bill to talk about, which is we're still on set. There we go. Item 7B, which is Assembly Bill 1570 by Lowe, Optometry, Certification to Perform Advanced Procedures. This bill is the scope bill, and I'll say a little bit more about what that means here in a moment. This bill, according to the author, and by way of background, our new members, is essentially a reintroduction of a bill that was introduced in 2022, which was AB 2236, also by Assemblymember Lowe. Today's optometrists, this is the author's statement. Today's optometrists are trained to do much more than they are permitted in California. Optometrists in other states are performing minor surgical procedures, including the use of lasers to treat glaucoma with no adverse events and little to no requirements on the training. This bill provides additional training that will be more rigorous than any other state and will ensure that patients will have access to the care that they need. That's just a brief statement. So essentially what this bill would do, and let me just be clear that this bill is not currently moving forward in this legislative year. California, we have a 2-year legislative cycle. The first year of that 2-year cycle begins in the odd year. And so this bill did not advance sufficiently far enough in this year to continue to move. That doesn't mean that it is dead or otherwise not capable of being talked about. It will be eligible to be discussed again by the legislature in 2024. The board position on this bill was support if amended, and our amendments were around issues of implementation, just trying to make the bill a little bit more workable and easier for the board. So let's talk a little bit about what the bill would do. It would create a new certificate type to allow optometrists to perform advanced laser surgical procedures, excision or drainage of non-recurrent lesions of the adnexa, injections for treatment of chalazia, and to administer anesthesia, and corneal cross-linking procedures. Prior to achieving this certification, optometrists would need to meet specified training, including the passing of an exam, as well as complete educational requirements developed by the board. It would also require optometrists to report any adverse treatment outcomes to the board and require the board to review these reports. So as I mentioned, this bill would expand the scope of practice for optometrists in California. There are only a handful of states in the country that currently have the ability for optometrists to engage in these more advanced procedures. Again, as I mentioned, our position was support. If amended, the board felt that the policy was agreeable, only had concerns about costs and implementation. Pursuant to that motion, staff has met and worked very closely with the California Optometric Association to provide feedback and ideas about ways to reduce some of these implementation costs. And those conversations have been very, very fruitful. We look forward to having more conversations with COA and other stakeholders in the new year as this bill becomes live again, if you will. So there's no action anticipated for this item, although the board could certainly change their position. As I mentioned, we've had great conversations with COA and look forward to reaching out soon with the eye docs, the ophthalmologists, and engaging them on hopefully moving this policy forward. I don't know if there's any questions from the board on this, but again, there's no action anticipated. We can take it.
So no comments from any board members? I'm going to ask for public comment in the room, and Christine Schultz from COA is coming up.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to provide public comment. Again, Christine Schultz with the California Optometric Association. Just wanted to thank you for the input that you provided so far through your executive officer. We have had numerous meetings about the bill. We've drafted language. We've changed it around. We're really working hard to make sure that we get the amendments that we need. And I honestly appreciate your input because it's a stronger bill, I think, moving forward. We've dealt with a lot of the issues that I didn't even realize were going to be issues. And it's just going to be a stronger piece of legislation. So thank you so much for your help.
Thank you, Christine.
Any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Schultz? Thank you. Are there any other comments, public comments from the room? No public comments from the room. Madam Moderator, if you could up the phones for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right. It appears there are no requests for public comment.
Great, thank you. All right.
All right, we'll move on to item 7C, AB 1707 by Pacheco, Health Professionals and Facilities, Adverse Actions Based on Another State's Law. This bill, we have a support position on. The amendments from July are non-substantive and just add co-authors and make other clarifying changes. So there's no action anticipated for this item. Again, the board position was support. And to be clear, especially for the new board members, what this bill is dealing with and the topics that it is attempting to address don't really impact our professions in optometry and opticianry. This bill is trying to get at actions that impact healing arts professionals that perform services such as abortion or other gender care type of services. There's been an uptick in states around the country taking punitive actions on providers who perform these type of services. And this bill is trying to address those actions that happen in other states in terms of how they might apply to those practitioners practicing here under a license. So again, optometrists are not generally involved in these kinds of services, but we included this bill several meetings ago on the agenda to show our board's support, if you will, for these other healing arts providers that do provide these services. So I just want to be clear on that. Again, there's no action item anticipated for this item, and the board position is support. So happy to address any questions or comments from the board.
Public comment.
We might as well just take public comment for all of them.
So any comments from members of the board? No comments from members of the board? Or is there any public comment from those people in the room? There is no public comment from people in the room. Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, it appears there are no requests for public comment.
Great, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 7D, SB 340 Eggman Medi-Cal Eyeglasses Prison Industry Authority. The board position on this bill was support. Subsequent to that position being taken, the bill has become a 2-year bill, which means that the bill will no longer be moving forward in this legislative year, 2023. Much like the scope bill we were just discussing, this bill will not be eligible to be considered by the legislature until the new calendar year, 2024. But this has been a bill and a topic, that we have been as a board engaged on for a couple years now. This bill, SB 340, is similar to SB 1089 by Wilk from 2022 and was sponsored by the California Optometric Association. We considered that bill, SB 1089, back in 2022 and also took a support position on it. The reason for this bill, according to the author, was that, quote, current DHCS policy requires that eyeglasses for the Medi-Cal program be obtained through CalPIA. CalPIA is the California Prison Industry Authority. Unfortunately, the delivery system is fraught with long delays and quality control issues. Medi-Cal beneficiaries often wait 1 to 2 months to receive their eyeglasses, and thousands are suffering because they cannot see well enough to perform necessary life functions. Over 13 million Californians rely on the Medi-Cal program for health coverage, including over 40% of the state's children, nearly 5.2 million kids. Description of the bill: this bill, for purposes of Medi-Cal reimbursement for covered optometric services, would authorize a provider to obtain eyeglasses from a private entity as an alternative to a purchase of eyeglasses from the PIA, Prison Industry Authority. As I mentioned, this bill is very similar to SB 1089 from the prior year. Including in your analysis is some facts, figures, some articles that we have linked to give you a sense of sort of where this bill was coming from. But as I mentioned, we took a support position in May, and subsequent to that position being taken, the bill has become a 2-year bill. According to the author's office, they are going to attempt a more narrower approach in 2024, owing to concerns expressed by the Department of Healthcare Services that the data provided by PIA showed compliance with the department standards. So essentially what that means is that Department of Healthcare Services administers the state's Medi-Cal program. The PIA has responsibility for the eyeglass program, if you will, developing the eyeglasses for that program. And according to the author's office, DHCS is apparently satisfied or happy with what's going on with that relationship at the time being, so that the bill will become narrower next year. So don't, again, have any action item anticipated for this. I think we should wait to see how this bill develops and changes in the new year, and then reconsider a position at that time. Happy to take any questions or comments from the board members. The returning board members will recall we had a quite substantive conversation on this bill last time.
Any comments from?
I have a kind of a general question, but if eyeglass orders could be fulfilled by a private entity, you know, someone outside of the PIA, do you think that could have any impact on the number of optometrists that take Medi-Cal patients? Just curious if that would have any effect at all.
Member Garcia, so I actually have some thoughts on that. So I think that is one of the benefits of this bill is, you know, with Medi-Cal, it's just a challenge to get providers to accept it as it is. So, you know, if providers could also provide the eyeglass portion of it, that would be a little more incentive for optometrists to engage in Medi-Cal. So there are a lot of parts of the state of California that have very few, if any, Medi-Cal providers. So it is a crisis. So this is one way to potentially help that. And historically, Medi-Cal has been very, very slow on the turnaround on glasses. Granted, it sounds like they're better, but there have been times when it would take months to get glasses in, and it's because it's in a prison. So prisons are prone to lockdowns. They're prone to a lot of things which stop work. So when all of your eggs are in one basket, that also creates a challenge. So I think by allowing this to go into other labs, whether it's a private practice or private labs outside of the prison system, it could only make things better. So that's, you know, just my thought.
Member Garcia, could I ask you a question? Have you seen any improvements or changes in your work? Because I know you do take Medi-Cal.
We do
and you're
take
in
Medi-Cal.
a unique area. Have you seen any changes or improvements over the summer?
So I think it is better. You know, I'll have to go and actually look at the numbers and the dates, but it is better. You know, we're not at 1 month and 2 months of a turnaround, but it's still definitely not even close to what it would be in a private lab. And it's definitely not as close as it would be in our own office. So while it's better, it's still not as good as the other options. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Any public comment from the room? I have Christine Schultz.
Thank you so much. Christine Schultz, representing the California Optometric Association. We thank the board for its continued support of this legislation, or at least we hope we thank the board for the continued support of this legislation. And we are continuing to look for examples and to find out more information about what really has transpired in the last couple of months. This is something that's changing fast. So we have a survey back from January that we've been basing our information on, and my understanding is that the Department of Health Services is saying that there's been changes more recently. So we're planning another survey of our members to find out more about the timeframes and how they've changed. I think that basically there's a big difference between the time that they're tracking and they're reporting to the department that they're tracking their internal timeframes versus the timeframe when the doctor sends it versus when the doctor gets it back. So that's where the discrepancy really is there. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Would the survey results be something that could be shared with the board?
Yeah, we'll
in the
definitely
future?
put them
Okay.
out. Yep.
Any other questions for Christine Schultz? Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments from the room? No public comments from the room. Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones for public comment, please.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and it looks like we do have a request from David Turetsky. And Mr. Turetsky, you'll be given 2 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. One moment while I get my timer up. All right. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Hello.
You're unmuted.
Oh, great. Hello, all. This is Dave Turetsky. Those of you who know who I am, the group with which I am affiliated, we are one of the largest practices in California. We see approximately 50,000 Medi-Cal patients per year in skilled nursing facilities. And I can tell you in real time that the average turnaround for a Medi-Cal pair of glasses can go upwards of 2 months. And when you're dealing with people who are on hospice or who have an extremely poor quality of life, 2 months is an eternity. So anything that we can do to improve the turnaround time, either through the PIA or being able to use a private lab, would be a tremendous benefit to folks who are living in very poor quality of life conditions, or they are at the end of their life. And this would give them some form of essentially enjoyment because they could once again read or watch TV.
Thank you, Dr. Turetsky. Madam Moderator, are there any other public comments on the phone?
This is the moderator. Appears there are no further requests for public comment.
Great, thank you.
Moving on to item 7E, SB 457, Menjivar Vision Care Consent by a Minor. The board position on this bill at the prior meeting was support. Excuse me. And just a brief update, because I believe in the last couple days since these materials were published, the bill has actually gone to the governor's desk and awaits his signature. I think in the materials we say it's still on assembly third reading file. So I just wanted to make that update. The reason for this bill is, quote, for minors affected by homelessness, accessing vision care can be a challenge. Existing law clearly states when an unaccompanied minor can consent to certain medical, dental, reproductive, and sexual health treatments, but it is ambiguous on an unaccompanied minor's ability to consent to vision care. Child's ability to see and access to regular eye exams are foundational needs that are vital to a child's learning and reading comprehension. This bill would authorize minors not living with their parents or guardians to consent to their own vision care and would authorize an optometrist to advise the parent or guardian under the same conditions applicable to the provision of medical and dental care. The bill also defines vision care, and just want to point out, especially for our new members, we actually do not have a concrete definition of vision care in our Practice Act. But the definition of vision care that the bill has provided for is very consistent with language that exists in Business and Professions Code Sections 3041. And that's one of our code sections in our Practice Act. As I mentioned, the board position was support. The bill has gone to the governor's desk where it awaits his signature. There's no action on this item for the board at the moment. Happy to answer any questions or address any comments from members.
Any comments from members? Nope. I'm going to ask for public comment for the room. There is no public comment for the room. Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and it appears there are no requests for public comment.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we are at our final item of item 7. This is 7F SB 544 Laird Bagley Keene Open Meeting Act teleconferencing. We've heard some of this about this bill earlier today. To address it formally on the ledge item, the board position on this bill was support taken at the May meeting. The bill has been subsequently amended with those amendments just recently going into print earlier this month. So let's talk a little bit about the bill. In response to COVID, executive orders and laws were passed that enabled boards subject to Bagley Keene to meet in a more flexible environment. As we heard earlier from the DCA representative, certain requirements around noticing of teleconference locations and ADA requirements were flexed or waived. Those allowances were only in effect until July 1st of this year and were not extended. And so what that meant was July 2nd and after, we all reverted back to the pre-COVID, if you will, Bagley Keene rules and laws, which doesn't mean that we cannot meet
in a virtual hybrid environment with members in teleconference locations throughout the state, it just makes it a little bit more difficult to do so. And so, for example, any board member under the current requirements that was attending this meeting and participating in it from a virtual location would have to have that location teleconferenced and open and accessible to the public. So that would preclude, places such as hotel rooms, for example, or your private residence, since it's probably not ADA compliant, just to give a couple examples. But SB 544 was introduced earlier this year, and it would extend some of those provisions that existed prior to July 1. Again, at the May meeting, the board took a support position on this bill, but it's been subsequently amended in two ways that we should talk about. One of those ways is that the bill now has a sunset clause on it. For those of you who may not know what a sunset clause is, that means that the law would only be in effect until a certain date, at which point it would revert back to the old law unless a subsequent law further extended that date. The bill provides for this sunset to occur on January 1, 2026. The more substantive amendment that occurred on August 14th is that the bill would now require a majority of the members of the state body to be physically present at the same location for at least 1/2 of the meetings of that state body during that year. Essentially, what that means is that if we wanted to meet in the more flexible teleconference virtual environment that we have been meeting, we would need to have some sort of tracking and reporting system so we could make sure that we were staying in compliance with this 50% requirement. There is no urgency clause in this bill, so it would not take effect until January 1st of 2024, should the governor sign it. So for the time being, as was mentioned earlier, we will probably be meeting, in this physical way because it's much more conducive under the current legal requirements. What does this mean in terms of a 50% requirement, a tracking reporting requirement? What do our costs look like if we have to start traveling again? Well, we're a fairly small board as boards exist in DCA, and last year our travel budget, we saved about 90% of it because we did not have to travel for board meetings. Our travel budget is somewhere around $30,000 on a yearly basis. So it's not we're a small board. We don't expend a lot of travel costs to comply with these requirements. But if we have to start meeting physically, then our travel costs will go up naturally, that we haven't been having to spend in the last few years. So again, our board position on this bill at the May meeting was support. There's recent amendments that would sunset this and put essentially a tracking reporting requirement to ensure that boards are meeting the 50% requirement for those instances that they're meeting teleconference and virtual. Up to the board to discuss and possibly revise the position. I believe as the executive officer that a support position we have on the bill would still be warranted, but happy to answer any questions and address any comments that the members have on this bill and the amendments and the possibility of changing or revising the position.
Any comments from board members?
I have one comment, Member Kleppa. I am clearly in support of any bill that allows us to meet virtually at least some of the time, for all the reasons that the executive director correctly noted. I have the same concerns the director does about these changes, and I'm not sure this option exists if we could simply say, we'll take what you can give us, but we'd prefer a better bill. I'm not sure if that option exists. If so, I'd love to explore it. If not, I guess we're stuck with support, in my opinion.
Here's what I would say, Member Club. I appreciate your comments there. And I probably should have been more clear on this. This bill was heard, I believe, in June or July in the committee. And the reason why it got out of committee was because the author agreed to take these amendments. So I don't think there's any real possibility that these amendments, the sunset date and the 50% requirement, will be meaningfully changed at all, precisely because that's why the bill is still moving. So
with that in mind, I guess I would stick with support.
Any other comments from board members? I'll take public comment from the room. There's no public comment from the room. Oh,
No, because the support.
okay. All right. And then Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones for public comment, please.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and it appears there are no requests for public comment.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item number 8, please.
All right, item number 8, consideration and possible action on legislative proposal to encourage optometrist licensees to take continuing education in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, DEIB. Excuse me. Just a little bit of background, especially for our new members to try to catch up to how we got to today. So essentially our meeting a year ago, August 26th, 2022, we received a board presentation on this topic from Dr. Ruth Shogi, saying her name right. Dr. Ruth Shogi, optometric doctor, who is the director of DEIB and associate clinical professor, Herbert Wortham School of Optometry and Vision Science at the University of California, Berkeley. It was noted during that presentation that the board does not have a requirement that licensees take cultural competency training or diversity, equity, inclusion training. As a possible parallel, it was also noted that current law allows and encourages licensees to take courses in child and elder abuse as part of their continuing education requirements. Although board stats reveal that most licensees gravitate toward taking courses in the statutorily mandated topics, most of those statutorily mandated topics, again, just by way of background for the new members, deal specifically with the practice of optometry. Members at that time expressed interest in the topic being mandated. At the January 27th, 2023 Practice and Education Committee meeting, members asked for the topic to be referred both to the Legislation and Regulation Committee, as well as included as a future agenda item for the next Practice and Education Committee meeting, which was held in March of this year. During that meeting, board staff provided the committee with additional information regarding options for pursuing this topic as a mandated continuing education topic. During the April 21st, 2023 LRC meeting, the committee discussed pursuing a legislative proposal that would encourage optometrists to take continuing education in DEIB. One of the main reasons why we moved from a mandate to an encouragement was that most of the other efforts that have recently happened around the department dealing with either cultural competency or diversity, equity, inclusion had happened in the statutory side of things and not on the regulatory side of things. The Leg-Reg Committee at the April 21st meeting requested that staff bring to the full board a legislative proposal for consideration in 2024 to pursue a statutory change which would encourage optometrists to take CE courses in DEIB. At the May meeting, the full board adopted the entirety of the LRC's recommendation. So today, what we are presenting is this very proposal. Included in the materials is a mock-up of what this would look like. We have current law with an amendment. So our current law regarding continuing education exists at Business and Professions Code Section 3059. And as was just mentioned, sort of following what we currently have in our law with respect to child and elder abuse, we are proposing to add additional language to this section, Business and Profession Code Sections 3059, to say, quote, the board shall encourage every optometrist to take a course or courses in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as part of their continuing education. If the board so desires, we have a motion that we've included for your consideration. Happy to address any comments or questions on agenda item 8 related to a proposal to encourage optometrists to take CE and DEIB.
I have a comment and if possible, even a request. I am not a professional in the field, so I can't speak to continuing education in this area. I also was not privy to the presentations the board received previously about this. So I would, and I would never compel, I would only humbly ask if any of my colleagues on the board who are professionals in the field could speak to this and indicate whether they believe there would be any downside to this proposal being enacted. That's simply a request.
Yes, Member Garcia. Good questions. I don't think there would be any downside at all. I think there's already been movement to encourage this for the last at least year to 2 years. And there's actually CE available specifically for these categories already available. So I don't think there's any downside. I think it would be a good thing to encourage. It doesn't mandate that they have to have an hour or 2 hours. It's just encouraging to enroll in the courses.
This is Member Linden. So just curious, what I know that it seems like an existing statute, there are, there's prior language that talks about shall encourage or shall require considering. Just kind of curious what encouragement would look like.
Curious what encouragement would look like in the future for this topic, or what we've done for the past with the other ones, or both? I'll try. I think I can answer all of them. So not exactly sure what we have done as a board or as staff to encourage in the past optometrists to take courses in child abuse or elder abuse. I'm not aware if we've done social media or other type of outreach like that. However, the CE regulation that we were just talking about, we do make, we include in that CE proposal information about elder abuse, child abuse. So that is one way by which we have moved as a board to encouraging that. How I envision this topic being encouraged, I don't think we need necessarily a regulatory route at all. As VP Garcia was just mentioning, and some of the research that we did to inform, I think the LRC committee and possibly the PEC committee, when they met earlier this year on this topic, was to look at what existing courses are already out there, right? We don't want to certainly mandate something or encourage something that nobody can take. At that time, and this was several months ago, ARBO, which we heard a little bit about earlier, the Association of Regulatory Boards of Optometry, and this is by way of brief background for some of our new members, especially the non-practicing members. In our existing CE law, ARBO is one of the providers of CE that is deemed automatically approved. So we've talked earlier, we have a practice and education committee, and they review courses and providers of CE. They review those courses and providers of CE that are not automatically approved. So categories of automatic approval are the universities that are accredited, and ARBO, among others. So as part of that research we did, we looked at ARBO and we looked at their course offerings. And I believe at that time there were something around 30, 40, 50 courses that had topics or subject areas that touched on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, something related to those topics. So one of the ways I think that we could encourage this as a board would be to develop social media campaign, listserv campaign, use our Spectacle newsletter to publish those courses and inform our licensees, hey, these are out there, we encourage you to take them. So that's my idea about it. We could certainly take it to the Consumer Protection Outreach Committee and come up with other ideas. We could do the same at the PEC, the Practice and Education Committee. But in my mind, that's an easy way that we can encourage this and get the information out there, because I think, as VP Garcia was just saying, this is an emerging topic, right? It's not just emerging for optometry. It's something we're talking a lot about as a society. And so we have a responsibility to help lead our people to where they can get this information. And I think that's one way that we can do that.
Any other comments from board members? Before I take public comment, can I get a motion?
Oh, this is Member Linden. I move to approve the proposed text for Business and Professions Code Section 3059, encouraging optometrist licensees to take a course or courses in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as part of their continuing education, and authorize the executive officer to seek a legislative author.
Can I get a second?
I second the motion.
All right, Dr. Bragg seconds. And I will now take public comment from the room. There is no public comment from the room. I will take, Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones to take public comment, please.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand icon. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and it appears there are no requests for public comment.
Thank you very much. Secretary Linden, if we could do a roll call vote, please.
Okay. Dr. Bragg,
Aye.
Member Kleppa,
Aye.
Member Linden, aye. Member Sue,
Aye.
Dr. Garcia,
Aye.
and Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Okay, and the measure passes. Okay.
So we will now go on to item number 9, which is future agenda items. Is there anything that any members would like to add to our future agenda items?
Just to ask, there was an item that I had seen in the prior minutes, but since it didn't affect the minutes being changed or voted on, I didn't bring it up at the time. Would this be a good time to mention that?
Go for it.
There was indication in the prior minutes about a tour of the Sacramento City College's new optical technology lab. Is that an option still available to other members? And if so, how would one avail themselves of that option?
I feel very confident, Member Kleppa, in telling you that following this meeting, I am sure that Ruby Garcia would spend 5 minutes with you. And in that 5 minutes, you will have your field trip coordinated. Is that fair, Ruby? Yeah.
Do I need a note from my mother? Or
No. But I appreciate you bringing it up, because for all of the new members and all of the members, what you're referring to is a tour I took and was able to participate in, and it was phenomenal. It was great to see that program being built out. I think when I was there, I remember the professor talking about how they still hadn't been able to get the wet lab in yet, and they're dealing with carpet. So it was a burgeoning program, right? They're building it, and it was really cool the time that I got to spend with those folks. So I would highly encourage you to do it. Encourage anybody else that would like to. I'm sure Ruby would be more than happy to take you up on that. So.
Great, thank you. I did have one other comment on a different topic. This was an article that I passed on to the executive director about recalled eye drops. I don't know if you recall that one.
Sure.
This is something I think the board may wish to discuss at our next meeting or one of our upcoming meetings regarding how the board acts in response to a recall of over-the-counter medications that are used in optometry practice, but are damaging to individuals. And I think the board should, if we don't already have so, develop some sort of process to respond to this.
Yeah, we can certainly put that up there, and I do appreciate, as a future agenda item, I do appreciate you bringing it up here for the full board. We're happy to talk briefly about what we have done with that, because there's actually been some further FDA recalls just this week, I believe. So if you go to our homepage today, for example, you'll see a consumer alert regarding the FDA recall from earlier this year. And then we are also working on website updates. And then once those are done, listserv and other outreach social media posts that we'll do regarding the more recent FDA recalls that occurred earlier this week. So we can talk about happy to put this on a future agenda item to more fully inform the board about what we do when we learn of these items.
Thank you for that. Since I did mention it, this is a July 24, 2023 Bloomberg article on eye drop emergency that brought it to my attention. Thank you to the executive director for that. That's all I had.
Any other comments from board members for future agenda items? Nope. I will take public comment from the room for item number 9, future agenda items. There is no public comment from the room. Madam Moderator, if you could open up the phones for public comment, please.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and it appears there are no requests for public comment.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we are now going to move on to item number 10, which is our closed session. We will be, just to let the public know, we will be adjourning from closed session. So once we go to closed session, we will not be coming back. I don't have to make a comment, right? Okay, all right, so we are now going to go to closed session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the public for attending our meeting.